GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Are authorities, are communities doing all they can to combat violent crime? With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
You're with GB News, with me, Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this Wednesday on GB News Live, Prime Minister's Questions. Yes, we're live at the House of Commons, back after last week's recess, and plenty of politics to stoke up the proceedings. Rishi Sunak facing that possible rebellion from his own backbenchers over the Brexit protocol in Northern Ireland, as well as facing, of course, Sir Keir Starmer. Across the dispatch box, the Labour leader already offering his party's votes for any deal to get through Parliament. So a fascinating dynamic at play there. And certainly a different dynamic at play with the government's industrial relations strategy, it seems. Talks with the nurses today, more money in the cupboard, and a slightly rosier economic picture. Dare we suggest things are looking up? Question mark. Big question too. Well, we're joined in the studio by Therese Villiers, Conservative member of Parliament for Chipping Barnet, and a former Northern Ireland Secretary, don't forget, Agriculture Minister too, so perhaps she knows where to get hold of an iceberg lettuce or a cucumber, seeing all the shelves are empty at the moment.
Tomatoes.
Also, Labour MP for Birmingham Perry Barr, Khalid Mahmood, who's a supporter of Brexit in 2016, we remember, and then switched to Remain just before the vote. So an interesting perspective on that. That's all to come with PMQs fairly shortly. Now then, let's actually just assess where we are first, Therese, on the whole question of the Northern Ireland Protocol. I mean, interesting that we had Sir Keir Starmer yesterday in Birmingham telling farmers, I didn't think I'd be here today because I thought I'd be actually in the Commons voting on some kind of bill to do with it. And it's all gone quiet. Do you know what's happening behind the scenes? Can you spill the beans?
I don't know what's happening behind the scenes, but what I do know is that there has been some real progress in the discussions between the Prime Minister and his team and the EU towards an agreement. Clearly, they haven't reached an agreement, but I welcome the fact that, particularly on the practical questions about the the friction on getting goods and food between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, they do seem to have made some progress.
Yeah, this is the red and green channels and so on. But of course, is the bigger, if you like, political aspect to it in terms of, do you follow EU law, do you follow UK law, and what the DUP think of that? But we'll come to that in a moment. But the other interesting dynamic is, of course, that Sir Keir Starmer has very helpfully, perhaps in Labour's view, said, you can have our votes to get this through. It's put Rishi Sunak in quite a difficult position.
Well, look, it's simple. Brexit is done. What the Labour Party wants to do is now to implement the issues that we have to deal with on a daily basis, get the agreements that we need to do to make sure our economy is at its best. And that's what Sir Keir Starmer is trying to do, is to actually help the government to ensure that we move forward. And the protocol issue in Northern Ireland has a huge effect across the whole region and in the UK as well. And so what we want to do is move away from that, move forward, put Brexit behind us and get normal economic activity going on.
Right. Am I right to reflect that you once in the speech said those using concerns over the Brexit impact on Northern Ireland were scaremongering?
Well, much of what they did say was indeed scaremongering, but of course...
But were they right?
Of course there have been, big complexities in terms of how we've had to deal with the north-south border. What many sort of predicted that the movement of people would cause real problems. And what I persistently reiterated is that we've had a common travel area between the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland since the creation of the Irish state in the 1920s. And there was nothing in Brexit that was going to affect that. And that has proved to be the case. But of course, I acknowledge that there have been these complex problems to tackle in relation to food and goods. And have they been exacerbated by the DUP's position on many matters and supported, therefore, by the ERG in the Tory party, that it's given Conservative leaders, one after the other, very little room of manoeuvre on this particular topic? I mean, the protocol itself always contemplated that it was going to be replaced. And what we absolutely need to do, as you sort of hinted at a moment ago, is we can't carry on with a situation where Northern Ireland is subject to thousands of EU laws over which it has no vote and no say. That's just untenable. So I completely understand why it is that no elected unionist in Northern Ireland supports the protocol. So are you expecting something pretty substantial then to come through from these talks, rather than sort of tinkering with red and green channels? I think we need both the tackling of the practical problems with pets and food and mail order and all these really concerning problems, but we do need to address that important constitutional question, because it's about Northern Ireland's place in the United Kingdom, and unless we solve it, I can't see how we get power sharing up and running again. We absolutely have to do that. Michael Martin in Dublin said, look, don't play party politics with this. It's too important. I can't see Sir Keir Starmer doing that. So, therefore, where is attack lines today to go in on this? Well, the attack line simply is this, that this was the oven-ready deal, which is half-baked now, and that's the way it's come across, is that it was all singing and dancing. We're going to go through, we're going to get Brexit done. Boris Johnson was there, achieved the Brexit deal, but delivered nothing because the detail wasn't worked through. And that's been my issue with Brexit, is that the whole structure of the deals that should have been there in place by now aren't in place, and we're suffering as a consequence. Right, OK. Now, the other aspect is, this apparent change in industrial strategy. of all contracted projects to date. Commons just coming up, so we'll be crossing shortly. Does the government think it's now got a bit more wriggle room on this and maybe can start, having started talking to the nurses today, get these various public sector unions on board? I hope they have got some ability to offer more pay. I mean, obviously, we would all like to see our public sector workers paid more, but they're still bound by those constraints on affordability, because if we take action which jeopardises the public finances, that means less to spend on frontline services, but it could also fuel inflation. Well, the mantra that we've heard from Rishi Sunak about inflation, although many economists think actually public sector pay doesn't have a direct consequence on inflation. It's more, private sector pay and private companies. That's right. It doesn't have such a great impact. So I really hope that these talks are productive. It is, and across the board, big pay rise in the public sector would be extremely... Mr. Speaker, I hope they can find more money somewhere. And in terms of, again, how Labour approach this, I mean, it's interesting that we've got one
union talking, but the other unions, GMB, Unite, still outside the door. So clearly Labour would be concerned as to, is there a divide and rule policy going on?
No, absolutely not. What the unions want, all of the unions in the national health sector want is a fair pay and terms and conditions for a fair amount of working. And that's all this is about. The government's got to step up to this now, deal with it. They should have been dealt with before Christmas, because the nurses says, look, get us in a room and start talking to us and we'll not have any action.
Although
that was avoided.
They were talking quite open about 19%, which is clearly unaffordable, unreachable.
Mark, anybody who's been involved in trade union negotiations, you put your best foot forward and you'll compromise on that. And unfortunately, I think the new people in the Conservative Party didn't quite realise that and made it stick to 19%. That was their idea. You negotiate down to a reasonable level, which people will give in to an extent in order to have a fair pay.
But the trouble with Labour is you just splash around these unfunded spending commitments. And at a time of global economic turmoil, where the aftermath of COVID leaves the public finances in real difficulty, that is a dangerous thing for an opposition to do. Only the Conservatives have got a credible plan to get inflation.
Well, absolutely not. The huge amount of
collegiate, though, to use that phrase. I mean, certainly Steve Barclay had gone back to the Treasury asking, look, can we have a little bit more to try and move this forward? And the Treasury said, no, your hands are tied, as we understand.
I'm sure both the Health Secretary and the Treasury would be doing all they can to meet the concerns of NHS workers, but they are constrained by what is affordable and what is wise in terms of in a period of inflation.
It's not just about the pay, is it? It's about the conditions, and certainly from quite senior consultants downwards saying, look, we have underfunded many areas for the last 12 years, and this is a cumulative effect. People are just fed up with it.
There has been a strong focus by the government on working conditions at the NHS, and one of the things we do need to do is to make sure that we carry on recruiting more people, because that is crucial. But we have got more doctors and nurses working in the NHS than ever before. Yeah. Spending is at record levels because health need is growing, and we need to support our NHS staff to cope with that.
Speaker on his feet. I think we're just about to launch into Prime Minister's questions, so let's hear what the issues of the day are going to be, and of course our panel will react afterwards.
As accessible as possible. Live subtitles are also now available on Parliament Live TV for all proceedings in the Chamber. I would also like to welcome some special guests who are observing our proceedings today, Madam President of the German Bundestag and the Deputy Mayor of Kiev and colleagues. You're most welcome. Yeah. We now come to questions to Prime Minister Andrew Weston.
Yeah. Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted that we are joined today by a delegation from Kiev. This coming Friday, there will be a national moment of reflection, which will give us the opportunity to pay tribute to the courage of the Ukrainian people and demonstrate our solidarity with Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Andrew Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I associate myself with the Prime Minister's comments with regard to the bravery of the Ukrainian people. Labour have asked his government on 3 occasions to commit to a police response to every domestic abuse call. To date, no answer has been forthcoming. Could the Prime Minister provide a response today?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, just this week we announced new measures to tackle violence against women and girls. This is a government that introduced the landmark Domestic Abuse Act that's rolling out specialist advisors for those who suffer and putting more funding to support victims. We will continue to do everything we can to make sure that women and girls are safe everywhere in our country.
The warm welcome given to Ukrainian refugees by so many is extremely heartwarming. Does the Prime Minister understand, though, how upset my constituents are to have bookings for weddings and other special family events cancelled when the Home Office took over a much-loved hotel? And will he redouble his efforts to put an end to this practice?
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friends, constituents, and indeed the whole country can be proud of the welcome that they have given to people from Ukraine over the last year. And I can assure him that we are committed to reducing the number of asylum seekers living in hotels at vast cost to taxpayers and considerable disruption to communities. I'm grateful to the leadership of the Home Secretary and the Immigration Minister in finding a sustainable solution, and the Home Secretary will make a formal update in the coming weeks on progress in standing up alternative sites for accommodation.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his comments about Ukraine? I had the privilege last week of seeing firsthand the courage and resilience of the Ukrainian people, and we must continue to stand united in this House in support of Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, can I also say that the thoughts of the whole House, I'm sure the whole country, will be with the family of Nicola Bully at this very, very difficult time. And can I welcome the new member for West Lancashire to her first PMQs. Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party is proud to be the party of the Good Friday Agreement and peace and prosperity in Northern Ireland. We welcome attempts to make the protocol work more effectively. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that it has been poorly implemented and that the basis for any deal must be removing unnecessary checks on goods?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me welcome the honourable lady to her place and associate myself with the remarks of the honourable gentleman about Nicola Bully's family. Our thoughts are, of course, with them. As he knows, we are still in active discussions with the European Union, but he should know that I am a Conservative, a Brexiter and a Unionist, and any agreement that we reach needs to tick all three boxes. It needs to ensure sovereignty for Northern Ireland, it needs to safeguard Northern Ireland's place in our union, and it needs to find practical solutions to the problems faced by people and businesses. I will be resolute in fighting for what is best for Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom.
Yes,
Mr. Speaker, we all agree that the protocol can be improved, but there are trade-offs and we need to face up to them. His predecessor told businesses that there would be no forms, no checks, no barriers of any kind. That was absolute nonsense and it destroyed trust. So in the interests of restoring that trust, will he confirm that to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland, the deal he's negotiating is going to see Northern Ireland continue to follow some EU law?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman is jumping ahead. We are still in intensive discussions with the European Union to ensure that we can find agreement that meets the test that I set, and that is sovereignty for Northern Ireland. It's Northern Ireland's place in our precious union, and it is to find practical solutions to the problems faced by people and businesses. I have spent time engaging and listening to those communities in Northern Ireland, businesses and political parties. I have a good understanding of what is required, and I will keep fighting until we get it.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is biting his tongue, but at some point the irreconcilables on his benches are going to twig and they're going to come after him. The former Trade Minister says there can be no role for the European Court of Justice in Northern Ireland. So will the Prime Minister be honest with them and tell them that's not going to happen?
Mr. Speaker, now again, we need to keep going to actually secure an acceptable agreement. But for the honourable gentleman to be talking about a deal that he hasn't even seen, that we are still negotiating, that isn't finalised, and it's his usual position when it comes to the European Union. It's give the EU a blank cheque and agree to anything they offer. It's not a strategy, Mr. Speaker, that's surrender.
Mr. Speaker, it's not my questions he's avoiding, it's their questions he's avoiding. His predecessors wasted months pushing the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. If implemented, it would tie us up in battles with the EU, the United States and others at precisely the time we should be building common ground to boost our economy and show unity against Putin. Now, the Prime Minister clearly wants a closer relationship with the EU. So can he confirm that if there's a deal, he will pull the protocol bill?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, look, what the honourable gentleman wants to put the EU first. I want to put Northern Ireland first. And on these questions, the honourable gentleman said he would respect the result of the referendum, and then he promised to back a second one. All the while, he was constantly voting to frustrate Brexit. And I know what the British people know, that on this question, he can't be trusted to stick up for Britain.
Mr. Speaker, the sound you hear is them cheering the Prime Minister, pulling the wool over their eyes. It's the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, the 30th anniversary of the Downing Street Declaration. Tony Blair and John Major both recognise that politics in Northern Ireland is built on trust and not telling people what they want to hear, and the need to take seriously the concerns of both communities, nationalists and unionists. It's vital their voices are heard. So can the Prime Minister confirm that whatever deal he brings back, this House will get a vote on it?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, of course, Parliament will express its view. But what is crucial? What is crucial here? But what is crucial here is that this is not about his desire to play political games in this House with this situation. This is about what is best for the people and communities of Northern Ireland. And that, Mr. Speaker, is what I will keep fighting for.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I take it from that this House will get a vote, and I look forward to that vote in due course. Because everyone knows the basis of this deal has been agreed for weeks, but it's the same old story. The country has to wait while he plucks up the courage to take on the malcontents, the reckless, the wreckers on his own benches. But I'm here to tell him he doesn't need to worry about that, because we will put country before party and ensure that Labour votes to get it through. He should accept our offer, ignore the howls of indignation from those on his side who will never take yes for an answer. Why doesn't he just get on with it?
Mr. Speaker, what I am doing is talking and listening to the people of Northern Ireland. That is the right thing to do. It's to make sure that we can respond and resolve to the concerns of the unionist communities and businesses in Northern Ireland, and that is what I will keep doing. But, Mr. Speaker, we know, but the Honourable Gentleman talks about his plans. We have heard that tomorrow he's going to announce 5 missions. But we already know what they are. It's uncontrolled immigration, it's reckless spending, it's higher debt, and it's softer sentences. And for the fifth pledge, Mr. Speaker, we all know it's that he reserves the right to change his mind on the other 4.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, the coroner determined that content promoted at Molly Russell that promoted self-harm and suicide contributed to her death. But they were only able to make that decision after years of campaigning by the Russell family and the coroners to gain access to that information. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that other families should not have to suffer as the Russell family have suffered, and that relevant data relevant to the death of a child should be more readily available both to families and to the coroner's service than it currently is?
Minister. Can I join my right honourable friend in paying tribute to the Russell family for their tireless and dignified campaigning on behalf of all families who have been bereaved in such tragic circumstances. The coroners already have statutory powers to require evidence to be given or produced for the purposes of their investigation, but the government is listening carefully to the concerns of parliamentary colleagues and to bereaved families. The Ministry of Justice and Department for Science, Innovation and Technology are leading those discussions to ensure that we have the right set of procedures in place.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, wholesale gas prices have fallen by 75% since their peak Yet in just a matter of weeks, the British government, the Westminster government, intends to increase energy bills by a further £500. What would motivate a Prime Minister to do such a thing?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, what we are doing is providing tens of billions of pounds of support for people with their energy bills, particularly the most vulnerable. What we're also doing, opposed by the SNP, is to invest in producing more homegrown gas here in the UK and the North Sea. But I would say to the honourable gentleman, as one of his own, one of his own members of Parliament said this week, that if the SNP were a pizza company, their products would be slow, wrong and costly. I would say to him, it's time to focus on the issues that matter to the people of Scotland, and producing more energy is absolutely one of them.
Stephen Flynn. I'm not sure that inferring that energy bills, Mr. Speaker, don't matter to the people of Scotland is a winning strategy for this Prime Minister. But let's get real. The fact that wholesale gas prices have fallen by 75% means a windfall to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of around £15 billion. So what they're saying, as it stands, is that they intend to raid the pockets of ordinary Scots whilst lining the pockets of Westminster. Mr. Speaker, it's time to set aside, any notion of an energy price increase to instead protect households and perhaps reduce bills by £500. Does he not agree?
Mr. Speaker, we're saving households across the United Kingdom, including in Scotland, £900 with their energy bills as a result of our energy bills guarantee. And in the coming years, we will spend £12 billion protecting particularly the most vulnerable families, pensioners across the United Kingdom. But the best way to reduce people's bills is to halve inflation, as we have promised to do, and it is to produce more homegrown energy here in the United Kingdom. That's something that this government supports. Maybe he could confirm whether the SNP supports that.
You're up, Mayor. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister was well aware of the dogged campaign of the Honourable Member for North West Norfolk for a rebuild of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in King's Lynn. It's a hospital constructed from failing aerated concrete, where ceilings are now supported by more than 3,000 wooden and metal props. But is the Prime Minister also aware of the strength of feeling locally in support of the rebuild, not just in North West Norfolk, but in Broadland, North Norfolk, Norwich North, Mid Norfolk, South West Norfolk, Huntingdon, North West Cambridgeshire and South Holland and the Deeplings, whose populations are all served by this hospital? Will he support our campaign?
Can I thank my honourable friend and indeed my honourable friend from North West Norfolk, because I know they are great supporters of this project, and I know over the last year or so the Queen Elizabeth Hospital has been allocated over £50 million to address the most immediate issues at the site, but I also know they have expressed their interest in being part of the new hospital programme. The department is looking through all those bids. He'll know that I can't comment on specific ones, but the selected hospitals will be announced in due course.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson. Can I thank the Prime Minister for his efforts in relation to the Northern Ireland Protocol. It is unacceptable that Northern Ireland has been put in this place with a protocol imposed upon us that harms our place in the United Kingdom. It must be replaced with arrangements that are acceptable and restore our place in the United Kingdom and its internal market. Does the Prime Minister accept how important the constitutional and democratic issues are in relation to getting a solution? No. And will he agree with me that it is unacceptable that EU laws are imposed on Northern Ireland with no democratic scrutiny or consent? And will he assure me that he will address these fundamental constitutional issues and do so not just by tweaking the protocol, but by rewriting the legally binding treaty text?
Prime Minister. Can I thank the right honourable gentleman for his question, but also thank him for the role that he has played in recent months in articulating unionist concerns. I've heard loud and clear when he says he wants and needs these issues resolved so that he has a basis to work with others to restore power sharing, and I know that that is genuine. He raised a question of practical issues, and it is vital that these are addressed. But he also raises, Mr. Speaker, a vital question about the constitutional and legal framework in which these arrangements exist. And I can assure him that I agree addressing the democratic deficit is an essential part of the negotiations that remain ongoing with the European Union. And just as he has been consistent, so have I. And I can assure him that this is at the very heart of the issues that must be addressed.
Mr. McVeigh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has made fixing illegal immigration across the Channel one of his key top priorities. He's also said that legislation will be required to stop it. I completely agree. So, can he tell us when we can expect to see this legislation coming forward, as time is of the essence? And can he explain why sorting out this issue did not feature on the Home Office Permanent Secretary's stated top 3 priorities for his department?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, thank my honourable friend for her question. She's right. Illegal crossings put people's lives at risk. It diverts resources away from those in genuine need, and it's unfair on those who migrate here legally. And that's why one of our 5 pledges to the British people is to stop the boats. We are working at pace on the legislation. It's important that it works. And in the meantime, our deals with Albania and France are already yielding benefits. But what I can tell her is that we want a system whereby if someone arrives in our country illegally, they will not be able to stay. Instead, they will be detained and removed to a country that they come from or a safe third alternative. That is the system that the Home Secretary and I are working hard to put in place, and that is what our legislation will deliver.
How about G. Signessi?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to the Prime Minister's policies, we are now inflicted with the highest tax burden and the biggest drop in disposable income since the Second World War. And to make matters worse, tens of billions of pounds of taxpayer money was wasted on a world-beating test and trace system, billions on PPE that wasn't even fit for purpose, not to mention the endless list of crony COVID contracts going to Tory chums who profiteered at the expense of other people's misery. So when will the Prime Minister help us to recover some of that lost money so that striking nurses, teachers and other public servants can be paid the decent wage that they so richly deserve?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased that the government is in intensive talks with the Royal College of Nursing to find a way forward. As I've always said, we are keen to discuss these terms and conditions, and I'm glad that those conversations are now happening. What I'd say to the honourable gentleman is he really cares about the impact of working people, then maybe him and his party should stand up to their union paymasters and back our minimum service laws.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for his support in the launch of the new regulatory reform group. Would the Prime Minister commit to working with our group in 2 specific areas? The first, to improve the accountability and responsiveness of our regulators to both stakeholders and to Parliament. And secondly, to improve the economic potential in key growing areas of the economy, such as financial services, artificial intelligence and advanced manufacturing.
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend makes an excellent point, and he's right about the importance of getting our regulatory framework right to drive growth and prosperity. That's why my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has set out an extensive review of retained EU law in 5 key growth areas, including life sciences, green industries and digital technology. But also, the Government Chief Scientific Advisor is leading work to consider how the UK can better regulate emerging technologies, enabling their rapid and safe introduction.
And David.
It was a pleasure to meet the delegation from Kyiv before questions and to confirm that across this House we are united in our support for Ukraine and its brave heroes. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative manifesto promised 40 new hospitals. After 3 years, most of these hospitals haven't even got planning permission yet. And communities feel betrayed and taken for granted.
Where are they?
As ITV showed yesterday, St Helier Hospital in South London is literally crumbling, but there's still no plan to save it. Hinchingbrook Hospital in Cambridgeshire has sewage leaking into its wards and a roof that could collapse at any moment. Does the Prime Minister agree that these are conditions no patients, doctors or nurses should have to put up with? Can he tell the House...
Just before we do, please don't take advantage of the order paper for Robert.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud that we're investing record sums into the NHS under this government. Also record sums in NHS Capital, not just going on upgrading almost 100 hospitals, developing 40 large-scale developments, as the Honourable Gentleman knows, but also investing in more scanners, more ambulances across the board so we can deliver vital care to people. And I'm very pleased that the most recent statistics on urgent emergency care show considerable improvement from the challenges we faced over December, and we now are on a clear path to getting people the treatment they need in the time that they need it.
2 o'clock.
Government's commitment to tackling illegal migration and particularly the issue of small boats. But can I ask my right honourable friend if he will reconsider the government's proposal to relocate approximately 500 single male asylum seekers to Beaconside in Stafford? And can I ask him to meet with me urgently to discuss this, given the huge amount of objections I've received from constituents on this issue?
Prime Minister.
Well, firstly, Mr. Speaker, can I welcome my honourable friend back to her place? And I know that this is an issue that is concerning her and her constituents, and it's why we must absolutely stop the boats and stem the tide of illegal migrants to relieve this pressure on our local communities. But I will ensure that she meets with the Home Secretary as soon as possible to discuss her concerns, and hopefully we can arrange that meeting in the coming days.
John McNulty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This month, the Scottish Child Payment marks its 2-year anniversary. In a cost of living crisis, this policy has been a lifeline to hundreds of thousands of people in Scotland. Therefore, will the Prime Minister follow the leadership of the Scottish Government and introduce an equivalent child payment?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the best way to ensure that children grow up not in poverty is to make sure they grow up in a workless household. And that's why I'm proud that under the record of the Conservative government, there are almost 1 million fewer children growing up in workless households, hundreds of thousands fewer children in poverty. And that's because this government is on the side of parents and will make sure that they have the jobs they need, because ultimately that is the best poverty strategy, is to have everybody in work.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've previously called out in this House the appalling level of service that my constituents and yours received from train operator TransPennine. Last month, TransPennine had the largest number of cancellations of any service provider in the UK, but it turns out that even this figure was fiddled, because TransPennine had cancelled over 1,000 trains before 10:30 the night before, so that they don't show up in the statistics. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that this practice is totally unacceptable, as is their level of service?
Well, I agree with my right honourable friend. The current service levels are unacceptable. The Rail North Partnership, which is managing the contract, is working with the company on an improvement plan. My honourable friend, the Rail Minister, is having weekly meetings with Rail North Partnership to monitor its progress. And whilst the TransPennine contract expires in May, and we are working on a new contract, if ministers conclude that the operator cannot be turned around, then other decisions may have to be made.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of the 40 promised new hospitals referred to by my right honourable friend, 11 of those are in the southwest of England. 3 of them surround my constituency in Barnstaple, Dorchester and Taunton, but none of them has planning permission. It's been reported that staff at Eastbourne District General Hospital were told that their town would not get a new hospital and that it was, quote, a barefaced lie. Given that the Prime Minister claims his mandate rests on a manifesto that promised 40 new hospitals, when will we see them?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to building 40 new hospitals as part of the new hospital programme. In the southwest, 8 out of the 11 schemes do have full outline planning permission approved, and the remaining 3 schemes, due to when they are due to be delivered, would not be expected to have planning permission at this stage, and we're working with the trust to go through that process. So everything is on track, and we will bring those hospitals to the people in the southwest.
Stevenson.
government's £3 million sent to Wolverhampton to trial the new Better Health app, which will support Wolfrunians make better choices about their diet and fitness. Will he welcome this and also celebrate our grassroots sports clubs in Wolverhampton, especially Wentzfield Aces Cycle Speedway Club, who celebrated their Diamond Jubilee last year?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, can I join my honourable friend in commending all her local sporting organisations for the job they do? And she's absolutely right. That prevention is absolutely better than a cure, and ensuring that we can support people to live healthy, fulfilling lives is absolutely part of our plan. And that's why we're investing in football pitches, tennis courts and youth facilities right up and down the country. And I'm glad that her constituents are benefiting.
Ellen Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government hasn't only broken its promises on new hospitals, it's also broken its pledge of 6,000 more doctors, with the number of qualified GPs having actually fallen. GPs in Shropshire are seeing 400 more patients each than they were in 2016, which is one of the biggest rises in the country. Places across the country, East Sussex, Devon, Cambridgeshire and Hampshire, have also seen the number of qualified GPs fall. When will the Prime Minister end his government's neglect of local health services and recruit and retain the GPs we need?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the facts of this, there are 2,200 more GPs in general practice today. There are 15,000 more doctors in the NHS, and there are 30,000 more nurses. And that's because we're putting record funding in and backing the NHS and getting patients the care that they need.
To Robert Matlin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I commend my right honourable friend in grasping the nettle and seeking to negotiate an agreement on the Northern Ireland Protocol?
Yeah.
Does he share my frustration with the expressed views of people who are commenting upon a deal that has yet to be reached? And does he agree with me that the best way to reduce or even end the jurisdiction of the CJEU is through treaty change itself and not through domestic legislation in this Parliament?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely right. We need to keep going, but he's also right that we need to find enduring solutions to the challenges faced by the people of Northern Ireland, and that's why, as my right honourable friend mentioned earlier, it is absolutely right that we address the constitutional and legal framework of our arrangements and ensure that we can put in place new arrangements that secure Northern Ireland's place in the United Kingdom.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is no stranger to paying fines, but last week the £2.3 billion he paid to the EU after the UK government allowed Chinese fraudsters to flood Europe with cheap goods is the worst waste of public money. My question is simple. If he can find £2.3 billion to pay a fine, why can't he pay NHS workers and others the pay increases they deserve?
Mr. Speaker, he may not have seen that the Royal College of Nursing are now in talks with the government about resolving the disputes, and I'm grateful to them. I'm grateful to them for entering to those talks with a spirit of a constructive attitude, but also to calling off their strikes next week. What I would urge him and his colleagues to do is be on the side of working people, and that's to back our laws to introduce minimum safety levels across the NHS and transport, because that's the best way to demonstrate that you're on the side of hard-working families, Mr. Speaker.
I wholeheartedly support my Prime Minister's priority to stop the boats. So could he please bring in the small boats bill next week?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for his support. I share with him the same desire, which is to stop the boats for all the reasons that we've discussed in this session. And he should rest assured that the Home Secretary and I are working intensely and as quickly as possible to bring forward that legislation, because what I want is what he wants, is to ensure that those people who come here illegally will simply not be allowed to stay.
Charlotte Littles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During recess, my community in Warrington was rocked by the murder of 16-year-old schoolgirl Brianna Jai. What support will the Prime Minister offer to our community and to our local schools in order to ensure that they have the support that they need to support Brianna's classmates and her family as we try to heal from this appalling tragedy?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank the honourable lady for raising this issue and express my sympathies to Rihanna's family and friends for what's happened. I know she will be playing her part in her local community in supporting them at this difficult time. I know the Home Secretary is shortly due to visit the area, and she will be able to discuss with the honourable lady what support can be provided to support the community at a time like this, and she should know that she will have what she needs from the government.
Final question, Anthony Michael.
Mr. Speaker, I can't ask the Prime Minister to stop time or tide, but I might ask him to offset it, because in South Devon the Slapton line is being eroded away, and I need him to help me lobby the Department for Transport and the DEFRA Secretary to see that we can get the repairs done, because Natural England is standing in the way of this vital link and stopping us from doing the developments that we need to do. Will he support me?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is a fantastic campaigner and advocate for his constituents. I know that this particular issue is causing frustration and concern in his community. He's absolutely right to raise it. I will ensure that he gets the appropriate meetings he needs with the ministers in question so we can work with him to try and find a resolution.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.
Just turn the sound down a little for you there as the MPs digest what they've been told, or haven't been told perhaps particularly, on where we are with the Northern Ireland Protocol. We can once more turn to our panel, because we have Theresa Villiers and Khalid Mahmood with us. Theresa, of course, we remember, was Northern Ireland Secretary in the midst of all this, 2012 to 2016, I think. So you've been there and seen and done it. Interesting that Keir Starmer says everyone knows the deal has been done for weeks. Why doesn't he get on with it? Is that your understanding, that there has been a deal done and they're still trying to just maybe sell it to the DUP and the ERG?
No, I don't think Keir Starmer's right on that. The Prime Minister is very clear. He's told me face-to-face personally, and he told the House of Commons just now, there is no agreement as yet. There's been progress towards getting one. And what I really welcome about what the Prime Minister said today is he realises that there are those two themes that we were discussing before that have to be dealt with, the practical problems, but also the constitutional and legal one, to ensure that we have a deal which the unionists can back and which will restore power sharing, which is...
So you haven't had the wool pulled over your eyes, which is the phrase that Keir Starmer used there?
I do not... no, I don't agree with Keir Starmer on that. I think the Prime Minister is still working really hard to find a deal that works.
And interesting to sort of work out where we go, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, DUP leader, then coming out and say, look, this is not just tinkering, if you like, with the issues of the border crossing. They are the main constitutional issues. Rewriting the treaty text is needed. I mean, that's not going to happen, is it, at this stage?
Well, the Prime Minister needs to deal with that. I think the key issue is, as Sir Geoffrey Donaldson has said, to get the DUP on board to deal with that. And this all stems from the half-baked Brexit deal that Boris put forward. And that wasn't correct. They voted for it at the time, and now they're debating against themselves, tried not to vote for it this time. That's what the problem the Conservative Party has. They've got to resolve this within them. They've got to resolve it with the ERG. The Prime Minister's trying to do that. He's not trying to answer Keir Starmer's questions, because the deal maybe not be completed, but it's there and they know what the deal is.
He also has to sell it to the country. And of course, Rishi Sunak came back and said, you know, basically, you're just interested in the EU, you're not interested in Northern Ireland. I mean, is that the case, that the Labour Party still sees trying to get back into some kind of relationship with Europe as a vital
No,
issue?
Absolutely not. I mean, the Good Friday Agreement is hugely important. Tony Blair and John Major put that into operation. It was vital for Ireland to do that, and Theresa, as then the following Secretary of State, did that and ensure the work that was done. We don't want to undermine that. That has to be there in order to allow the Northern Ireland government to proceed and then to do that. We're not doing that. And the Conservatives now have got to take this seriously, look at what they voted for, and try to come to terms and agree what is best for Northern Ireland to ensure that they stay part of the United Kingdom.
Right. Now, apart from the DUP, against Keir Starmer warning the Prime Minister, irreconcilables on the Tory bench is going to come after him. He's biting his tongue. At some point, they're going to twig and they're going to come after him. I mean, is that the problem that Rishi Sunak has got? He's trying to keep this party together that did for Theresa May.
Well, of course it's a divisive issue, but what unites us all is we believe it's vital to safeguard the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. We believe it's vital that power sharing is restored, and therefore we need changes to that protocol to deal with that. It is just not working in its current form. It was always envisaged as a temporary arrangement. Now is the time to change it, because if we don't do that, then we will not have political stability or devolved government in Northern Ireland. We cannot let this current situation be prolonged.
Yeah, because obviously Stormont is still not back in action, and the DUP just won't countenance that. But what about this protocol bill? Some have described it as a sword of Damocles over the whole picture. That clearly, if that is invoked at any stage, that brings us into direct confrontation then with the laws and puts Britain in a very difficult position.
Well, in a negotiation, you always have to have the option to walk away. If the EU is not prepared to agree sensible, proportionate terms on altering the protocol, then the Prime Minister will have to walk away. And in those circumstances, acting unilaterally via the protocol bill to resolve the concerns that people have, I think will be the right approach. But the preference and the priority, of course, is a negotiated agreement. But absent that, absent a reasonable approach by the EU, we will need to act unilaterally, and the bill provides a means to do that.
OK. Sir Keir Starmer was pressing him, will the Commons get a vote? Because already, we've indicated Labour's offered its votes.
Yeah.
I think the answer was that, of course, the House will have a view on it. I'm not quite sure that's agreeing that they will have a vote.
Well, I think that is more or less saying that there will be a vote on that, which is good. And I think it's important that we bring it back to the House and have a proper decision based on this, and for him to see also who in his party are going to be opposing him in the way it's been done.
But will there also be Labour members who perhaps will not be happy with what's being presented to vote on?
Well, there may be. And, of course, people have very strong feelings about this very important issue. But at the end of the day, 3 years on from Brexit, we've got to deal with this issue, and it's got to be put to bed and allow Northern Ireland to continue normally. And that's what we want to do.
Yeah. What are your estimates as to how soon this might be addressed? Because clearly the indications are from Rishi Sunak that, we've got things to try and get past perhaps the DUP and the ERG. I mean, do you think that there could be anything through by the end of this week, or are we talking weeks and months away still?
And, well, that's the big question, isn't it? It's clearly there are noises coming out of Dublin, for example, which are suggesting that it's all practically a done deal and announcements are imminent.
And video calls have been going to and fro. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I can't see that.
You didn't
happening.
pick anything up from the mood music.
Well, given what the Prime Minister has said about what he wants to achieve, I think that is going to take longer than the next few days.
Yeah.
I suspect we won't see, if there is going to be agreement, I'm not sure we'll see it.
And is it unfair to suggest that Sir Keir Starmer is quite happy to see him swinging in the wind on this for a while?
He's not swinging. He's being constructive. He wants to move forward. He wants the issue to move forward and to deal with that. We should, in April, be having the new term and then the King's opening of Parliament. That could possibly be delayed now if this isn't put through. So there are a number of issues that we've got to look at that, Teresa.
But you've got to admit, Keir Starmer is a bit of a late convert to all of this. As the Prime Minister pointed out, Keir voted persistently to try and frustrate Brexit and was one of the foremost advocates of a second referendum.
Yeah.
Well, so did the ERG. And I think people had different views. And what Keir Starmer is saying now, Teresa, is that we've had the deal, we've moved out of Europe, let's make it work, and that's what we've got to do.
I'm here to tell him he doesn't need to worry about that, because we will put country before party and ensure Labour votes to get it through.
Yeah.
Do you take him at his word?
No, because he's changed his mind on so many issues.
Which is what Rishi Sunak was saying at the end there.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, almost all of his platform when he was elected as Labour leader has been abandoned. So why should we believe him on Brexit? He spent months, colluding to try and frustrate with these Cooper-Letwin acts. You remember all the traumas of those months and months of meaningful votes, and Labour seeking to take control of the order paper.
Can I just ask you one instant question before we go to Olivia's? Would you want to be Secretary of State for Northern Ireland at the moment, given all this?
I'm not necessarily envying Chris Eden-Harris in his role. It's a tough one at the moment, certainly.
Really testing the sort of the good humour and everything else. But clearly, I mean, as we know, the discussions are going on. But let's, as we say, actually cross down to Westminster now, and Olivia is waiting for us there. And Olivia, interesting that Keir Starmer went straight in on Northern Ireland. No oblique attacks this time. It was full on.
Yes, well, Keir Starmer's strategy in this PMQs was definitely to try and exploit Tory fractures over Brexit. So he asked about that Northern Ireland Protocol bill, which is very popular among some of the more stringent Brexiteers in the party who feel it's the best way of keeping sovereignty over Northern Ireland. He asked whether there would be a vote on the issue, which obviously is something Rishi Sunak would ideally quite like to avoid, because it was exposed just how many MPs in his party disagree with the deal which he's reaching. On the other hand, Rishi Sunak had quite a good strategy too of painting Keir Starmer as a sort of EU obsessive, while he, the Prime Minister, is simply concerned about what goes on in Northern Ireland. So it was a pretty clever strategy from the Labour leader, but the Prime Minister pretty much held his own. Of course, the more awkward questions really come from the DUP and his own backbenchers, who will not be happy if the ECJ continue to have jurisdiction over Northern Ireland. And as Keir Starmer pointed out, it's hard to see how that's avoidable. So it was a PMQs which really got to the heart of this very, very difficult issue.
Absolutely. And it was tantalising when Keir Starmer said, everyone knows the deal has been done for weeks, why doesn't he just get on with it? I mean, is there actually talk behind the scenes there that you know, really the rump of the deal is there, and they're just trying to sell it, if you like, to the ERG and to the DUP?
Well, this is a fascinating question, because we've been hearing rumours for a long time that there was this deal on the table, that the deal had been agreed with the EU for over a week before Rishi Sunak went to the DUP to talk about it. Now, the argument for that is that Rishi Sunak wanted to gain the trust of the EU by negotiating behind closed doors and not, you know, making it a three-way negotiation between the EU and the DUP, which obviously makes life difficult for the EU. But it was interesting that Keir Starmer played into that, because we know that Number 10 aren't happy at all with this idea that they waited before bringing the DUP in, and that's certainly a consideration which has made life harder for Rishi Sunak, because the DUP feel very much as though they've been kept out of the loop. So Keir Starmer bringing that up was a real knife in the side of Rishi Sunak. Number 10, it's important to say, does keep denying the fact that the idea that the deal was on the table for a long time before Rishi Sunak spoke to the DUP about it.
Yeah, but an indication of the difficulties perhaps was Sir Geoffrey Donaldson speaking for the DUP, calling for a wholesale rewriting of the treaty text, not just the sort of tinkering with the cross-border customs regulations. I mean, that clearly is not going to happen at this stage, is it?
Well, yes, absolutely. And that felt a little bit like a step back for Rishi Sunak in this negotiation, because I was in Belfast on Friday, and Sir Geoffrey Donaldson was saying, although they weren't at the point where a deal had been agreed, he felt that substantial progress had been made. And this morning it was being said that the DUP felt that 3 or 4 of its 7 tests had been met. And there were really quite positive noises coming out of the DUP. But for Geoffrey Donaldson to say that rewriting the entire Northern Irish Protocol would be necessary to gain their support must have been a bit of a blow for Rishi Sunak, who at least thought we were further ahead than that.
Yeah, indeed. Olivia, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for that. And of course, we'll see what emerges on the protocol throughout the afternoon. Thank you for your time. Thank you to our MPs. They're staying with us to look forward to what may be coming or not, as we've been discussing. Also coming up here on GB News Live, the inquest into Nicola Bully's death has opened at Lancashire Coroner's Court. We'll be updating you on more on that. Stay with us here.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now let's update you on what we heard earlier with Shamima Begum losing her legal case over British citizenship. The 23-year-old, as she is now, left London when she was just 15 to travel to Syria and join Islamic State, but not able to return to the UK. Home Secretary at the time, Sajid Javid, stripping her of her British citizenship in 2019 on security grounds. And reacting to the news from the court today, he's tweeted, "I welcome today's court ruling, which has again upheld my decision to remove an individual's citizenship on national security grounds." He went on to say, "This is a complex case, but Home Secretary should have the power to prevent anyone entering our country who is assessed to pose a threat to it." Well, we're still joined in the studio by our 2 MPs, Theresa Villiers and Khalid Mahmood. Thank you for being with us. Quick reflection. I know it's a confirmation of the status quo, if you like, but clearly still these questions on how do you decide whether someone is a threat or not. And her lawyers were saying she was trafficked, she was a victim of sexual trafficking and therefore should be treated as a victim, effectively.
I'm sure the government thought very carefully before they made the decision they did on Shamima Begum, and I think it's welcome that scrutiny in the courts has confirmed that
quite
they were
detailed
justified
scrutiny
in
at that. Yeah.
I'm sure it was very, very rigorous. You know, no doubt there's scope for appeals. But,
well, I was going to ask you, I mean, because obviously you've got some legal background. I mean, is there actually anything else now that her lawyers can go through? Because I thought this was the sort of process of the appeal against the appeal, if you like.
As I understand it, there is a possibility of further
okay.
appeal. So this won't necessarily be the end of the story. But you know, the government does have to take a great deal of care in relation to individuals who've travelled abroad to fight and take part in extremist Islamist conflict.
And even, I think, if she'd been successful today, it wasn't necessarily then open to her to return here to Britain, because she does have, and this is what is complicating, which obviously Sajid Javid indicated, that she's got citizenship of Bangladesh, dual citizenship, so therefore she is not a stateless person as such, according to the...
Well, she has citizenship through parentage. She's never lived in Bangladesh. That's an issue. But obviously going through this level of courts, with the security information that we're not privy to, I think we have to take this very, very seriously. Issue of people being radicalised is something that I've stood against ever since I've come into Parliament, since 2001. And I continue to do that. And I think we also now have got to look at those people who have gone across, how we deal with that. And we have to have legislation before us with the security forces working together to try and get some intelligence of those people who've gone across, where the links in the UK are and how we deal with that.
But should that information, that intelligence, be tested in a court of law in terms of a hearing? Clearly, people can give evidence from behind curtains. They can keep their identity secret if they're intelligence operatives, whatever.
Well, Teresa's on the Intelligence Committee, but I would be very hesitant about bringing any of the security intelligence to any format which is open to public access. So I think I would agree that this needs to be kept secret.
Right, and I know there are limitations as to what you can say because you are on that committee, but, I mean, this is the legal basis of her lawyers' stand. This needs to be tested in a court of law. That's what they say.
Well, clearly it has been tested in the...
But in terms of the information that was provided saying that she was a threat, and they're saying that hasn't been tested as such.
It is, the courts have well-established procedures for rigorously testing secret information without its being disclosed to the public. So if there are further procedures in this case, I'm sure there is an absolutely adequate way to make sure that everything is properly scrutinised, but not in a way that jeopardises our national security.
Yeah, and dare I ask, do you think this is an end to it? Or, I mean, I know that the legal avenues may still be open, but do you think that basically that will be pursued now?
Well, the history of controversial cases of this kind suggests that legal proceedings can drag out potentially for years and years, not least with, persistent judicial reviews.
It keeps the lawyers employed, dare one suggest, as well.
It does, yes. So I don't think this is the end of the matter.
No,
but I think Labour. I'd like to see Labour get on board and support the government's decision on this. So what is Labour's position on this? Would they be supportive of the government?
My decision on my issue. I'm not on the front bench. So my issue on this is that I work with Tom Tugendhat with Policy Exchange on the issue of treason, where people have gone abroad and fought against and the interests of the United Kingdom or its forces.
Just taking action against.
It's taking against. That's right, treason bit. And therefore you bring them back. They obviously are arrested under that and judgment given for their arrest and imprisonment. And then the security services allowed to be able to question them and get some more information, which we should have and need that.
OK. While you're here, in addition to Northern Ireland, you had to look after agriculture and food. Many people saying they're turning up at their supermarkets, no lettuce, no cucumber, no tomatoes. We're being told it's because of bad weather in southern Europe, Spain particularly, in Morocco. But the NFU saying, we told you this was going to happen because we haven't secured food security in our country. And that obviously would be pointing the finger at the government for many years.
We have a very resilient supply chain for our food in the United Kingdom. I mean, throughout, there were, for example, repeated sort of anxiety about whether it might be jeopardised during the COVID emergency. It wasn't. We have, a world-class retail sector, but sometimes weather events can affect supply. And I think this is a good opportunity to redouble our efforts to make sure that more of the food we buy and eat is produced in this country.
But growing our own at the moment is going to be very expensive. If you've got to heat a polytunnel or a glasshouse to get cucumbers and tomatoes, it's going to cost you a pretty penny, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we need a sense of balance. I mean, for example, there's products that, we can't produce in this country all year round. So we're always going to be reliant on imports.
Right.
But we do need to do as much as we can to support our farming sector and meet our domestic needs.
No, we're paying. We're speaking to the NFU yesterday.
We're paying 30% more for our food than Europe is, and therefore there's a strategy we need to look at. We do have the agricultural sector we need to support, but there are other than deals that we need to do in proper order to ensure that we get the proper requirements that we need for our people, but at a decent price, affordable price.
Thank you to our panel. Thank you for being a great pleasure. And as you say, thank goodness you're not Northern Ireland Secretary still at the moment. Who would want that job? Back at the top of the hour with more reaction to what we heard at PMQs, all the other stories as well. Stay with us, particularly on the Begum story, of course.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. Outbreaks of rain are crossing the country, followed by showers, but also brighter spells into the west during the course of the afternoon. It'll feel a bit colder compared with recent days as temperatures head a bit closer to average behind this cold front. This is the front that's brought the outbreaks of rain and an awful lot of cloud as well. Behind that front, although the rain will continue for a time in East Anglia and the southeast, the rain does clear eastern Scotland and eventually parts of northeast England start to dry up. But further showers follow into the north and west of Scotland, Northern Ireland, as well as Wales and the southwest, accompanied by a brisk wind, making it feel colder. Temperatures back in the mid to high single figures by and large, rather than the double figures. However, there will be some further rain at times for the northeast of England, pushing into the Midlands as well as parts of the southeast through the evening. Some showers continue further west, predominantly around coast, but otherwise lengthy clear spells, especially for Scotland and Northern Ireland, and it's here where there will be a widespread frost with temperatures in sheltered spots dipping below freezing. But we keep the cloud across central and southern parts of the UK, as well as some outbreaks of rain first thing Thursday. That will keep things frost-free, but it will also be a damp start in places. The rain tends to fizzle out by the afternoon, brighter skies follow, and a decent slice of sunshine for the likes of northern and central England, Wales as well. But further spells of rain push into the north and northwest of Scotland by the end of the afternoon, accompanied by a strengthening wind with coastal gales for the Northern Isles. That rain tends to pep up across the northwest Highlands into Thursday evening. Wet day to come here, but it also sinks a bit further south across the rest of Scotland as the evening wears on. A lot of cloud for Northern Ireland, but clear spells for the southern half of the UK, leading to a frosty start on Friday. But the rain turns up here later on, and then it clears with drier weather for all this weekend.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this lunchtime, Rishi Sunak confirming in the Commons that MPs will have a say on the Northern Ireland deal, which is reportedly done despite unease on his own benches and within the DUP. Is the Prime Minister now facing a major Conservative rebellion, though? What does it mean for the rest of Rishi Sunak's premiership? Reaction in Westminster and Belfast, and we'll speak to a Northern Irish journalist on what they make of it. Also, Shamima Begum loses her legal appeal against removal of a British citizenship. It's delighted some, enraged others. With high emotions on all sides, we'll look at what the law says with legal expert Joshua Rosenberg. And later in the week, that President Biden was brought to Kyiv on a secretive rail journey, and Britain announces £10 million to help Ukraine's railway network. We'll be speaking to their rail boss and ask him how his war-torn train's punctuality record is. Yes, better than ours here in the UK. Let us know what you think about, of course, that, particularly if you're trying to travel by the Trans-Pennine route, maybe. And, of course, all the other issues of the day. And get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But let's get the latest headlines now with Aaron.
Hi there, it is 2 minutes past 1. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister is facing renewed pressure to strike a deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol. Rishi Sunak told the Commons intensive talks with the EU are ongoing and he wants to tick all the boxes. He also suggested any new deal would be put to a vote in the Commons.
I am a Conservative, a Brexiter and a Unionist, and any agreement that we reach needs to tick all three boxes. It needs to ensure sovereignty for Northern Ireland, it needs to safeguard Northern Ireland's place in our union, and it needs to find practical solutions to the problems faced by people and businesses. I will be resolute in fighting for what is best for Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer says Labour will support the Brexit trade arrangement, but he criticised the delays, suggesting Tory division is partly to blame.
Everyone knows the basis of this deal has been agreed for weeks, but it's the same old story. The country has to wait while he plucks up the courage to take on the malcontents, the reckless, the wreckers on his own benches. But I'm here to tell him he doesn't need to worry about that, because we will put country before party and ensure that Labour votes to get it through.
Shamima Begum's lawyers say every possible avenue will be urgently pursued to challenge today's ruling, which upholds the decision to remove her British citizenship. The 23-year-old who left the UK to join the terrorist group Islamic State in Syria lost her appeal, with her case dismissed on all grounds. The Home Office has welcomed the ruling, but her lawyers say it leaves no protection for a British child trafficked out of the UK. Earlier, the Shadow Attorney General, Emily Thornberry, told us people should be allowed to return to the country to face justice.
What we don't want, and it will be a threat to possibly our country, maybe other countries, is for there to be a large cohort of people who are simply stateless, who have no future, who have no hope, who are living in camps somewhere. What will happen to them? What will they think about, the West? What threat will they be in the long term to the West, or their children will be to the West in the long term? We do need, as an international community, to think this through and not wash our hands of people.
However, the security specialist Will Geddes told GB News Ms Begum may still pose a security risk to the UK.
That they're pushing through right now, Bev, is that she was trafficked, she was manipulated, she was groomed. That doesn't diminish the threat that she potentially presents, having been through that process. She was very compliant with what she did down there. There are a number of other factors that no doubt Mark is also aware of, which is to do with the Yazidi women, how they were treated down there, how they were used as slaves, and, right along to the fact that she showed zero remorse when she was found in 2019. In the Syrian refugee camp.
An inquest has been opened into the death of Nicola Bully, whose body was found on Sunday. Preston Coroner's Court heard the mother of two was identified by her dental records. Her body was recovered from the River Wire in Lancashire, a mile from where she was last seen on January the 27th. London Underground drivers will stage a fresh strike on Budget Day next month. Drivers will walk out on the 15th of March in a dispute over pensions and working arrangements. It follows a vote in favour of industrial action by 99% of members of the ASLEF union on a turnout of 77% in a ballot. Intensive talks are being held this afternoon in a bid to resolve the dispute between nurses and the government. The Royal College of Nursing's paused next week's 48-hour walkout, which would have been the biggest strike this winter. The government says a 3.5% pay rise is affordable. The union wants 5% above inflation, but has indicated it's prepared to meet halfway. New CCTV footage has been released of a missing aristocrat and her partner as police renew their appeal to find them. Constance Martin, convicted sex offender Mark Gordon and their newborn baby were last seen on January the 8th in Newhaven in Sussex. Video shows the couple walking near a petrol station wearing big coats and carrying large bags. Authorities believe they've been sleeping in a tent and are concerned about the baby's welfare. British Steel says it's planning to close the coke ovens at its plant in Scunthorpe with up to 260 jobs at risk. The company says it's trying to overcome global economic challenges and build a green and sustainable future. They say its energy and carbon bills increased by nearly £200 million last year, and they've had to act decisively to improve operating costs. British Steel also says it's continued talks with the government to adopt clean energy policies. But the Unite Union says they've threatened the company with industrial action following the job cuts. Well, this is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. But now it is back to Mark.
Aaron, thanks very much indeed. So, the Northern Ireland Protocol, a divisive issue that Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer used against Rishi Sunak during today's Prime Minister's questions. Branding the post-Brexit trade agreement as poorly implemented, Sir Keir insisted the basis for any deal must be removing unnecessary checks on goods. And he added the Prime Minister was pulling the wool over his MPs' eyes. Rishi Sunak insisted he had a good understanding of what was required and would be resolute in fighting for what was best for Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom. But he also confirmed that MPs will have their say on any deal. Let's listen again to the main exchanges.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is biting his tongue, but at some point the irreconcilables on his benches are going to twig and they're going to come after him. The former Trade Minister says there can be no role for the European Court of Justice in Northern Ireland. So will the Prime Minister be honest with them and tell them that's not going to happen?
For the honourable gentleman to be talking about a deal that he hasn't even seen, that we are still negotiating, that isn't finalised, and it's his usual position when it comes to the European Union. It's give the EU a blank cheque and agree to anything they offer. It's not a strategy, Mr. Speaker. That's surrender.
Now, the Prime Minister clearly wants a closer relationship with the EU. So can he confirm that if there's a deal, he will pull the protocol bill?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, look, what the honourable gentleman wants to put the EU first. I want to put Northern Ireland first. And on these questions, the honourable gentleman said he would respect the result of the referendum, and then he promised to back a second one. All the while, he was constantly voting to frustrate Brexit. And I know what the British people know, that on this question, he can't be trusted to stick up for Britain.
But it's the same old story. The country has to wait while he plucks up the courage to take on the malcontents, the reckless, the wreckers on his own benches. But I'm here to tell him he doesn't need to worry about that, because we will put country before party and ensure that Labour votes to get it through. He should accept our offer, ignore the howls of indignation from those on his side who will never take yes for an answer. Why doesn't he just get on with it?
But the honourable gentleman talks about his plans. We have heard that tomorrow he's going to announce 5 missions. But we already know what they are. It's uncontrolled immigration, it's reckless spending, it's higher debt, and it's softer sentences. And for the fifth pledge, Mr. Speaker, we all know it's that he reserves the right to change his mind on the other 4.
So, spirited exchanges there in the Commons. More reaction to that in a moment. But let's just break away and take you to Moscow with these live pictures coming in with President Putin at a huge rally at the Luzhniki Stadium. This is, just to remind you, Defender of the Fatherland Day, actually marking 1 year on from the invasion of Ukraine, or the special military operation, as they have it there in Moscow. Have a quick listen to the voices. Tell you that, of course, this is stage managed, and selected members are in that crowd, including, of course, members of the military there, and the obligatory chanting. Now, just to remind you that this morning Putin met China's top diplomat, Wang Yi, who's in Moscow as part of a tour, and Wang telling Putin the relationship between China and Russia would not succumb to pressure from third parties. Putin then saying that he was awaiting a visit from President Xi Jinping. So clearly the diplomatic stakes are being raised. Meanwhile, just to remind you, President Joe Biden is still in Poland, in Warsaw, and will be holding talks with leaders of NATO's Eastern European border bloc, known as the Bucharest Nine. Clearly, he is indicating that democracy will win, but this is not the message we heard from Putin as he wags his finger once more, blaming yesterday the West for the war in Ukraine and withdrawing Russia from the nuclear arms treaties, the one remaining arms treaty. Some don't quite seem quite so sure what they should be chanting there, a reflection maybe, but clearly the flags are being waved, the songs being sung in what is a sort of community stadium, I suppose, or sports stadium, and Putin is addressing the issues, and of course we've got these various speeches being made. Just to remind you, 1 year on. So clearly they believe they are I think some people leaving the stadium there. How unfortunate. However, we'll reflect on the situation there in Moscow and seeing what's going on in Warsaw. But let's return to London, to Westminster. Olivia Utley is waiting patiently for us there to cast her vote over who won and who lost in that particular battle in the chamber. Interesting that Keir Starmer went straight in on the Northern Ireland Protocol. No oblique questions this time. And this fascinating line he came up with. Everyone knows the deal has been done for weeks. Why doesn't he just get on with it?
Yes, absolutely. It was clear that Keir Starmer's strategy in this PMQs was try to expose some of those Tory fissures over the Northern Ireland Protocol. And he asked about the ECJ, whether Rishi Sunak could really guarantee that affairs in Northern Ireland wouldn't be overseen by the ECJ, something that the DUP and hardline and Brexiteers aren't very happy about. He also asked about whether there would be a vote on any sort of deal, which is another awkward question for the Prime Minister, because ideally he would quite like to avoid a vote because it would expose just how many Tories on the back benches don't like the wording of the deal. For his part, Rishi Sunak made a good show of showing up Keir Starmer as a sort of EU obsessive, while he, the Prime Minister, was simply concerned about what happened to the people of Northern Ireland and what the people of Northern Ireland wanted. So although it was a pretty strong play from Starmer, it did feel as though Rishi Sunak held his own. Perhaps the most difficult moment for Rishi Sunak was when Geoffrey Donaldson, the leader of the DUP, suggested that to make the DUP satisfied with the deal, he would have to not only tweak the customs arrangements, which is the most contentious part of the Northern Ireland Protocol, but actually rewrite the Northern Ireland Protocol essentially from scratch, which felt like a bit of a step back for Rishi Sunak, because over the weekend it sounded very much as though, although the DUP weren't exactly happy with the terms, they did feel as though strides had been made forward, and it sounded like it was possible that they might not actually say that they weren't happy with the deal at all. But that did feel like a bit of a step back. Now, you raised a very interesting question of Starmer talking there about... Sorry.
Yes, I was just saying, just to remind you, the quote was, why doesn't he just get on with it, indicating everyone knows the deal has been done for weeks. And this, of course, is what's been exercising political minds there. Is it that the EU thinks that they've offered the best that they can and take it or leave it? And obviously Rishi Sunak has to try to sell that to the ERG and to the DUP.
Yes, thank you. So, yes, there is this rumour that the deal had been agreed with the EU weeks ago, and Rishi Sunak had taken his time before bringing it to the DUP and hardline Brexiteers. And that has been a problem for Rishi Sunak over the last few days, because the DUP and his own backbenchers feel that they've been left out of the negotiating process. So it was quite clever of Keir Starmer there to put that question in, because it made it expose the pressure that Rishi Sunak has been under from his own backbench MPs. The other very interesting challenge from Keir Starmer was essentially challenging Rishi Sunak to go ahead and put this bill before the House without the support of his own backbench MPs and the DUP, with the assurance that Labour would vote it through. Now, that puts Rishi Sunak in a difficult position, because he claims he wants to get this deal over the line, but it makes the Prime Minister look very weak if he's passing serious, big legislation only with the help of the opposition.
Yeah, indeed. And therefore, an indication of the sort of delicate tightrope that Rishi Sunak's going to have to tread on this. But, Olivia, thank you for that. That's the situation in Westminster. What about in Northern Ireland? Let's turn to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's in Belfast, and Darren, reflect on what we heard from Sir Geoffrey Donaldson there of the DUP, that it wasn't just about tinkering with these customs regulations. It was the whole fundamental constitutional issue and the rewriting of the treaty text. I mean, that's not going to happen, is it?
You wouldn't have thought not. I think what the DUP are essentially asking for is kind of democratic consent in all of this. They feel that at the moment some of the laws made here in Northern Ireland don't really have the consent of the public, i.e. they're not really part of the process. The laws are made at an EU level that can be imposed on Northern Ireland. Of course, there'll be a role for the European Court of Justice in all of that as well. And what they want to see is much more democratic consent, the use of the Assembly, the use of Stormont, if you like. But it is clear that the DUP, while recognising, I think Geoffrey Donaldson last night, speaking to Conservative MPs, said that 3 to 4 of their 7-point plan had been met, that clearly they're not at the line yet. And it is pretty difficult for Rishi Sunak, trying to ensure that you've got, yes, your Conservative backbenchers in support of this, but also the DUP, while at the same time negotiating with the European Union. And we have to remember here in Belfast as well that the DUP is also just one party. It doesn't speak for everyone here. It is, yes, the largest unionist party. It gets about 30% of the votes. But there are a lot of people here in Northern Ireland who actually are in favour of the protocol as it stands, who think that the protocol provides Northern Ireland with the best of both worlds, that it gives them access to the UK single market, but also the EU single market as well. And then the UK government needs to be aware of the fact that these negotiations cannot simply just be with the DUP. They have to be with the SDLP and Sinn Féin and the other parties. And all this, of course, while pressure builds, and this is fundamentally why Rishi Sunak's taking this undertaking now, if you like, ahead of the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. Yeah. The British government desperate to see Stormont restored before that April deadline.
Indeed. Darren, for the moment, thank you for that. But let's stay in Northern Ireland and speak now to Owen Polly, who's columnist at the newsletter. Owen, everyone's still watching and waiting, even though, obviously, Sir Keir Starmer indicating the deal's been done.
Yes, I think we're still in the dark. And I mean, obviously, Rishi Sunak thought that he had something to sell to the DUP when he came to Northern Ireland last week, but that ran into problems over the weekend simply because it didn't seem to deal with the substance of the protocol, really. It was just technical tinkering at the edges of it. And I think that that's why we've seen this week the DUP leader really trying to steer the discussion back to the substance of the protocol and the fact that Northern Ireland is still in effect in the EU single market for goods. And while that's the case, it's difficult to see how a deal can be struck that would satisfy the demands of unionists, which is basically to restore Northern Ireland's full place in the United Kingdom, and particularly in the United Kingdom's internal market.
Yeah, this is what Sir Geoffrey Donaldson described as the fundamental constitutional issues when he spoke in Westminster a little earlier. So, I mean, you don't think that there'd be any possibility of them trying to decouple the political situation and get the trade moving in terms of the nuts and bolts of the cross-border customs regulations, because the DUP sees that the two are fused together?
Well, the two issues are fused together. I don't really see how they can be separated. It's not that the DUP here is squabbling over minutiae or abstractions. It's talking about the building blocks of being part of a nation state, i.e. who's making your laws, who has a right to say what your taxes are going to be, and which market you're a part of. Yeah. So even if you take the issue of the green and red lanes, for example, that's all very much tied up with these single market regulations as well, because if goods can come into Northern Ireland through these green lanes from GB, I mean, first you're going to want to know what sort of a scheme companies have to go through to sign up to these. But you also need to know if they need to meet single market regulations in order to send the goods into Northern Ireland, because obviously that's going to in itself form a barrier, and particularly in the future if Great Britain diverges further from Northern Ireland's trade laws and from single market trade law.
Indeed.
Trade laws, as they are now.
Yeah, so neither green nor red, but stuck at amber for the moment, maybe. But Owen, thank you very much indeed for updating us, and we'll see, of course, what emerges in the coming days. Suggestions, of course, they're going to try and get some deal by the end of the week, but we shall see. You're watching GB News Live, and coming up, we'll have the latest on...
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Let's bring you some breaking news now with two organised criminals at an organised gang at the centre of a major people smuggling ring, sentenced for attempting to smuggle Vietnamese nationals into the UK in the backs of lorries. Now, the National Crime Agency was able to disrupt that gang, part of a much wider and highly organised smuggling network operation. Well, despite the recent focus on the small boats crisis, authorities say the use of lorries and other vehicles to smuggle illegal immigrants remaining a significant problem. Details of the jailing coming up. But first, our Home and Security Editor Mark White has these details in the report.
These officers from the National Crime Agency are about to take down a major people smuggling ring. An organised crime group operating from this address in Birmingham, responsible for smuggling illegal immigrants into the UK in the backs of lorries. In handcuffs, a leading figure in the conspiracy. Vietnamese national Hai Duong Le orchestrated the transportation of hundreds of his fellow countrymen and women on at least 7 separate occasions. Le and fellow gang member Habib Basodi are now convicted for their part in a wider people smuggling network, bribing lorry drivers to take illegal immigrants across the English Channel. The National Crime Agency put the gang under surveillance before moving in to disrupt their operation. These Vietnamese were found in the back of one of the lorries authorities intercepted. Those being smuggled were transported through the Channel Tunnel or on cross-channel ferries before being met by other members of the crime gang in the UK.
These two individuals, for us as an agency, we would view this as an excellent result because investigating organised immigration crime is not easy to do for a whole host of reasons. But I think that the fact that these two individuals have been found guilty is significant, not only for ourselves as an agency, but the law enforcement community.
Although the focus of late has been on the smuggling of people across the Channel in small boats, the use of lorries and other vehicles remains a key challenge for law enforcement and border officials. Thousands still attempt to sneak onto lorries here at Calais and at other French ports every year. The vast majority of drivers certainly don't want them on board and face heavy fines if any are found. But there are clearly some prepared to work with the criminal gangs in what can sometimes prove to be a deadly endeavour. In 2019, the bodies of 39 Vietnamese nationals were found inside this refrigerated lorry in Grays in Essex, having suffocated in the back of the airtight trailer. But that did little to deter the people smugglers from a criminal enterprise which, like the small boats trade, is worth many millions of pounds. For now, at least, one of those gangs has been disrupted, its key player in prison. Mark White, GB News.
And we'll have more from Mark live in the studio on that fairly shortly. But let's update you now that the inquest into the death of Nicola Bully has opened, and it heard that the mother of two had to be identified by dental records. The hearing at Lancashire Coroner's Court, the inquest was looking into the circumstances of her death, but police remaining under pressure about why it took 23 days to locate her body and why officers had decided to release information about her personal circumstances to the media, although that's not being addressed by, of course, the inquest. But let's speak now to our national reporter, Theo Chicombo, who's at the Coroner's Court. And Theo, the coroner taking the time to indicate the family had not attended for obvious reasons, he said. And this causes the opening. I gather maybe the full inquest may be in June.
That's right, yes. The opening of the inquest took place today. It only lasted a few minutes. It was a brief one attended by members of the press. And of course, we know the mother of two, Nicola Bully, was part of a long-going missing persons search in St Michael's on Wyre. And she was formally identified by the police to the press on Monday evening. And today we heard from the coroner, Dr. James Adley, who said he had contacted a consultant maxillofacial surgeon to ask him about dental records, and indeed they were able to identify Nicola's body using dental records. And he said he examined the body at around 2:15 on Sunday afternoon, and he's saying also said, "I'm satisfied on the balance of probabilities and more that positive identification has been made." It's worth pointing out that Nicola's family was not in attendance today, and we also understand the family have been informed of the date and time and place of the opening of the inquest, but have chosen not to attend for reasons he said he could understand. And he also saying over the next couple of months, those specialists and other investigators who have gathered evidence will have this time to formally go through that over the next few months until this summer, where we understand it's likely a full inquest will take place in June once the availability of a Home Office pathologist has been checked, and of course allowing others to get through that evidence. So we do understand the full inquest will take place in June.
Theo, thank you very much indeed updating us outside the Coroner's Court, indicating obviously it's a very difficult time for her family. Thank you. Well, coming up here on GB News Live, we'll be taking you north of the border to find out just what's happening in this SNP leadership with all the twists and turns. That's in a moment. First, let's get an update on all the news headlines with Aaron.
It is just after 1:30. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister's facing renewed pressure to strike a deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol. Rishi Sunak told the Commons intensive talks with the EU are ongoing, and he wants to tick all the boxes. Sir Keir Starmer says Labour will support the Brexit trade agreement, but he criticised the delays, suggesting Tory division is partly to blame. Shamima Begum's lawyers say every possible avenue will be urgently pursued to challenge today's ruling, which upholds the decision to remove her British citizenship. The 23-year-old, who left the UK to join Islamic State in Syria, lost her appeal, with her case dismissed on all grounds. The Home Office has welcomed the ruling, but her lawyers say it leaves no protection for a British child trafficked out of the UK. The inquest into the death of Nicola Bully's heard the mother of two was identified by her dental records. Her body was recovered from the River Wire in Lancashire on Sunday, a mile from where she was last seen on January the 27th. New CCTV footage has been released of a missing aristocrat and her partner. Police are renewing their appeal to find the missing couple. Constance Martin and convicted sex offender Mark Gordon, along with their newborn baby, were last seen on the 8th of January in Newhaven in Sussex. Authorities believe they've been sleeping in a tent and are concerned about the baby's welfare. TV online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. Do stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Let's update you now on the latest on the SNP trying to find a new leader. Let's just reflect the views of Scotland Minister John Lamont, which is providing this in terms of a discussion with Labour Shadow Scotland Secretary Ian Murray. John Lamont saying the SNP have decided to provide the country with compelling drama now that Happy Valley has ended. Well, indeed, the Scottish Finance Secretary Kate Forbes, Health Secretary Humza Yousaf and former Community Safety Minister Ash Regan, all the runners so far to replace Nicola Sturgeon. But of course, Kate Forbes has been under fire after saying she would not have voted for same-sex marriage. Ash Regan saying she firmly supports the right to equal marriage. Let's get more from Glasgow with our Scotland reporter Tony Maguire. And Tony, I don't know if you heard what John Lamont had to say, but clearly it is drama of a kind, perhaps not what the SNP wanted, though.
No, certainly, rather than, I think, compelling drama, they would much have rather had 3 compelling candidates at this rate. But me talking to the people of Glasgow today, you know, that's a bit up in the air, I think. Certainly a few people that I spoke to didn't even know who was running, and those that did know didn't really feel very satisfied with the choices. You know, they thought that it perhaps wasn't fair to be choosing the best of a weak bunch. If you cast your minds back to 2004, that was the last time we really had a real SNP leadership campaign. Of course, Nicola Sturgeon walking into Phil Alexander's shoes after the Scottish referendum. It's got almost the feels that they've forgotten how to do it, you know. Certainly we have 3 runners right now who you just mentioned. We now have 4 people who have obviously been encouraged to put their hat in the ring but haven't. Angus Robertson, Joanna Cherry, Keith Brown, and today from Ben McPherson. Now Ben McPherson, SP for Edinburgh North and Leith, and he had quite an interesting thing to say on Twitter where he seriously considered the situation would benefit from the inclusion of a 4th option, a progressive option, you know, maybe painting the picture of what the conversations are like within the party at the minute. SNP obviously being quite a close-knit fortress of information. Yeah. I think we can all attest to that at some point.
That's quite interesting. So very quickly, Tony, I mean, when do all the nominations have to be in by? Do we know that?
Yes, we do. So roughly a little over 48 hours from now, on Friday, all the nominations have to be in. I certainly don't know whether we will see any more at this race. Some of the top picks on the day of Nicola Sturgeon's resignation have already counted themselves out. My favourite probably being Angus Robertson's choice to be first dad instead.
OK, well, watch this space, perhaps. But thank you for that little nugget there in Glasgow, Tony. But let's speak now to Alistair Stewart, who's columnist at the Scotsman newspaper. And Alistair, one reflects this is a bit of a gift to all political journalists north of the border, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think a week is a long time in politics to enjoy a cliche, and it's hard to believe this time last week Nicola Sturgeon had resigned. This is very much not what she probably envisioned would happen next. Kate Forbes was the late entrant. She was the front runner. There is a feeling that she has perhaps very much destroyed her own campaign before it really got a chance to kick off. Why people are surprised by that, particularly those MSPs who initially endorsed her, I don't know. Her views have always been well known. Indeed, when she was first elevated to the cabinet and first took on the finance portfolio, she did an interview, very much was on the front foot with this. So there's nothing really surprising there, but nevertheless, the fallout is considerable and there are serious questions ahead for her.
Yeah, and interesting that John Swinney, Deputy First Minister, talking about this being unhelpful, much of the contest being focused on the issue of her comments. And it is an important point. I mean, given all the problems with drugs and poverty, the health service, transport and so on, no one's talking about that, it seems, in a substantive way.
I think that's entirely correct. The big issue here is less what Kate Forbes has said and what she believes, and optics. The challenge for the SNP is, and the question centering on this, is how much belief will inform policy decision making. Really, the reality of that is how much will Kate Forbes' beliefs inform SNP optics. When you get a situation when Philip Schofield is discussing it and it becomes a national story, then yes, that's a challenge for the SNP's progressive reputation. That's the biggest thing that they have going for them. And if you remove that, and if you are to put in even the semblance of an opinion that there could be an incredibly hard ultra-conservative edge in there, and that could undo the legacy, particularly of Nicola Sturgeon, then yes, those are serious questions. This is not going to go away. She's doubling down. She's not going to drop out.
Yeah.
But one must be careful to centre on her too much. All of the candidates have expressed controversial opinions at some point. It's just that Forbes has gone on the record earlier than others, and she's now paying the price for that.
OK, interesting. And we'll see if there is a fourth runner and rider, as well as Tony was indicating. But Alistair Stewart from the Scotsman, thank you for your thoughts. And we'll see what emerges in the next couple of days. Thank you. Now, the Kremlin confirming that President Putin has been meeting China's top diplomat, Wang Yi, after he held that annual speech yesterday in Moscow. Also announcing Russia will be suspending the key US nuclear arms treaty, the only one left. Russia's parliament voting in favour of suspending it. Well, China and Russia say they are opposed to all forms of bullying as the US and EU prepare for more sanctions, perhaps, for Russia. President Biden is meeting more leaders from the NATO Eastern Bloc. Joining us now is Rear Admiral Chris Parry, once more, former NATO commander. And Chris, we're also seeing these pictures a little earlier from this stadium where the flags are being waved and the fingers are being pointed at the West. It does play very well, of course, with a section of the Russian populace. But he is backing himself into a corner, maybe, with this rapprochement with China.
Well, I think we all know that Russia, China and Iran have a fairly loose pact in opposing the Western way of life and also the international rules-based system. What they really want is a world safe for bullying great powers to do what they want. And right now, China sees the Ukraine crisis as a means of splitting the NATO alliance for the European from the North American part. And also, it's quite happy to sit on the sidelines and watch the free world take on totalitarian Russia. Nobody's being honest in this debate on that side, and all we're getting is neat propaganda from both China and Russia.
Do you believe, however, that it's realistic that China could start providing ammunition and armaments? Because that does change the whole nature, given the problems, of course, NATO has in supplying what's been expended by the Ukrainians in artillery particularly.
Mark, they're already supplying through North Korea and Iran. Yes, it's entirely credible that they should do that. They're not doing it openly at the moment. But the fact of life is if they become the arsenal of autocracy, to parrot another phrase, then Russia will simply become a small population with a lot of resources. It'll become a vassal state of a China that has a huge population and very few resources. Russia simply will be sucked into China's orbit. And I'm afraid to say that the confrontation will then be between China and the free world. It already is. We need to accept that China is set against everything we believe in the West. We're focused on Russia at the moment, but actually we should be looking at China as well.
Yeah. We're being told that this rally in central Moscow with President Putin on stage, it was minus 12 centigrade, which perhaps indicates why the spring offensive has not been launched yet. I mean, we're not exactly in spring in terms of Russia and Ukraine.
Well, Mark, as a military man, I'd prefer to go when it's minus 12 than when it's during the thaw, when the roads and territory are really muddy. And that's what messed up the Russians last time, as well as the Ukrainian resistance. What I think this visit by Wang indicates is that he's preparing the way for a visit by Xi Jinping in April or May. And also, I think the Chinese are going to propose some sort of peace bid in about a couple of weeks' time. Now, I dare say that's not going to be favourable to Ukraine or indeed to a fair balance of what is going on between the various parties. I wouldn't even be surprised if he suggests that there are Chinese peacekeepers somewhere in the mix. Certainly it will favour Russia. I suspect that China will say, let's freeze it in position now and see how it goes. There's no way Ukraine or the free world wants that.
Yeah, and certainly keeping hold of Crimea at all costs, one reflects. But Chris, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts once more, and we'll assess, of course, what happens in the coming weeks. And just to remind you, we've got President Biden speaking to the NATO leaders from the eastern flank in Warsaw. Update you on that. But let's tell you now about Shamima Begum, who's lost that legal challenge over the decision to remove her British citizenship. Just to remind you, she travelled to Syria to join ISIS when just 15 years old, and then found in 2019 in that refugee camp in Syria, and then her citizenship was revoked. Well, since then, she's been appealing against the decision. Let's get the views now of legal commentator Joshua Rosenberg, who joins us. Joshua, I guess status quo as such, and I think even if she'd been successful, it wouldn't necessarily have meant that she'd be coming back to Britain.
That's right. The fact that she's lost suggests that she is going to go to the Court of Appeal. But as you imply, if she had won, I suspect the Home Secretary would have gone to the Court of Appeal. And this case may even end up in the United Kingdom Supreme Court, as it has once already, on the question of whether she should have been allowed back into this country to put her case to the tribunal that ruled against her today. So no, it's not the end of the road. And yes, she stays in northern Syria for the time being.
Yeah, and just to remind people, I mean, the lawyers saying that she'd been trafficked and that she was stateless and so on, but Britain saying, well, hold on a minute, she does actually have the availability to take on Bangladeshi citizenship, and therefore she is not stateless.
That was the argument that was put at the time that the Home Secretary took away her British citizenship. Now, that argument has failed. I think it's accepted by everybody that she's now an adult. Bangladesh will not let her in. And that wasn't really the question before the court today. What she came up with in the current hearing was this question of whether she'd been trafficked and whether, as a result of that, she had been deprived of her human rights. And broadly speaking, what the tribunal, it's called the Special Immigration Appeals Commission, SIAC, what this court decided was that in practice, the Home Secretary's decision was one for him. The courts, the judges are not going to second guess the Home Secretary. He, as it was at the time, knew perfectly well the issues of national security, and it wasn't for the court to substitute their own views. The Home Secretary had handled it properly, and for that reason, his decision was not going to be overturned.
Yeah, which was Sajid Javid, of course, at the time. Joshua,
yes, it was indeed.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's now bring in our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, who's with us in the studio. And Mark, perhaps some relief for that former Home Secretary and indeed others in government that this won't be going to a British court, because clearly the fear was that if the sources of intelligence and all the things that Sajid Javid had on his desk in terms of intimating that she was a threat to national security, that could be openly questioned in court.
Yes, and that's why, I mean, Shamima Begum, clearly herself and her supporters have said, look, just let me go back to the UK, put me on trial, and of course I'll abide by whatever the decision of that court is. Not that she would have any choice in that matter. But the difficulty is when you have events that have taken place in such a dysfunctional country as Syria has been, in the middle, effectively, of a war zone, in the midst of a terrorist attempt to overthrow that particular government in Syria as well. It's very difficult to get reliable information that you can put before the courts regarding events that have allegedly taken place in that country. Now, that doesn't mean there's not an abundance of intelligence which has been gathered, of course, over the years by those intelligence assets, those sources in Syria. But what the government in the UK and, of course, their intelligence services do not want to do is expose those assets in any way, which is always a danger when it reaches the forensic examination of a courtroom.
Yeah, because they could still be in situ as such and therefore still operational. But last thought on this, where does she go, where can she go from this? I mean, clearly Joshua was saying that, there could be further appeals, but is this realistically it?
I don't think so for a minute. She has a machine behind her, which is, all of the human rights groups and the charities who have been by her side throughout this process since 2019, when she came out of hiding in Syria and ended up in this refugee camp in northern Syria. She's now in the Al-Roj camp in northern Syria. They will continue to fight. They'll explore whatever avenue is open to them, as you would expect them to do, fighting on her behalf. So I don't think there's any end to this. We just need to look at the situation with the asylum-seeking small boats crisis, where you have the Rwanda situation,
which is still going through the courts,
and that has probably quite a few months, if not years, left to run on that before we finally get a conclusion to that.
Now, just on another matter, we were updating people on this sentencing, Vietnamese people smuggling, but not in boats this time. This was actually in the back of the lorries, which you remember from all those years ago. Well, as obviously we just alluded to there, the focus has been of late on small boats crossing the English Channel, understandably, with almost 46,000 crossing last year alone. But thousands of people still cross the English Channel in the backs of lorries or in other vehicles every year. And we don't know really the true number who've crossed, because unlike those coming in small boats, 99% of those coming across in small boats are intercepted by Border Force or lifeboats, and the people taken ashore. And reach safety for that.
Yeah, if people are in the back of a vehicle and they make it safely to the UK, then you don't know necessarily that they've made it safely to the UK. So it's difficult actually to really get a handle on the numbers, except to say there are thousands who are stopped each year in the backs of lorries. And this particular case, well, it related to lorry drivers who were being bribed by a criminal network. One individual, described by the National Crime Agency as the UK linchpin of an international smuggling operation to take Vietnamese nationals over to the UK. This man, Hai Jung Lei, 33 years old, now been jailed for 7.5 years at Birmingham Crown Court this morning. But of course, his smuggling endeavours will, I'm sure, be taken up by other individuals, because just like the small boats crisis, Mark, there is no end of profit to be made by this particular approach. So there are criminals always willing to move in and to take up the gauntlet.
Mark, thank you very much indeed for that. And of course, we'll reflect on that story a little later. But let's go to sporting matters now. And of course, the big showdown was expected between Wales and England in the Six Nations on Saturday. But just like Delilah, it could actually be scrubbed. Welsh players perhaps deciding to go on strike. WRU bosses meeting the players today to try and thrash out a deal on pay and conditions. Paul Hawkins joins us from outside the Principality Stadium in Cardiff. And Paul, it's being described as a crunch meeting, even though indications were that Warren Gatland thought maybe he could get his players together. But where are we with the talks at the moment?
Still thrashing out that deal, actually. Just to give you the background to this, the players said if we don't get a deal by today, we are withdrawing ourselves from selection. Some people are calling it a strike, for the match against England on Saturday. Huge implications for Welsh rugby, because Wales could be set to lose out on £10 million from that match if they didn't play it, not to mention the wider knock-on effects for the economy, both in England and in both in Wales and in England, where of course the pubs rely on people going to watch the rugby to keep the trade up. So basically the Welsh players are saying, Look, we have had uncertainty for months now about future contracts and current contracts. Three things that they're asking for from Welsh rugby bosses. They want representation on the Players Rugby Board. That's the organisation that runs Welsh rugby, comprising the Welsh Rugby Union and the 4 big clubs. They're also asking to scrap this rule where you can only play for Wales if you've made 60. You can only play overseas if you've made 60 appearances for Wales. They're saying we want that scrapped, or at the very least reduced to 30 or 15. And then they're also asking, saying that they really don't agree with this proposition on pay, which is you get 80% of the value of your contract. So if your contract's worth 100 grand, you get £80,000, and you can have 20,000 on top for performance-related bonuses. So they're currently trying to thrash out the details of this agreement, of this potential future contract. In the meantime, a lot of hospitality businesses, pubs, bars, etc. in Cardiff, very worried about what might happen if the match doesn't go ahead.
It'll be catastrophic, really, in business terms. Look, I know there's a lot of bad things going on in the world, but for us, you know, in the smallest pub in Cardiff, we're talking about a week's worth of trade in one day, and to lose that in the context of really the financial year will be really, really poor. They're great marquee days for Cardiff City Centre, and you know, again, as somebody who's worked in the city centre for 40 years, I can't imagine what it's going to be like.
Yeah, and I don't know if you are a rugby fan, but do you understand why the players are feeling they have to take this step? They're saying they don't have certainty and security about their careers.
You know, actually I can talk about pubs and managing pubs, but in terms of how other businesses operate and what players have to do versus the union and all the rest of it, yeah, I am a rugby man and I am aware there's been financial issues, and I just wish they'd get on and sort it out.
Yeah, so the hospitality industry in Wales very worried, as will a lot of bars and pubs in England, as in England and Wales as well. I am hearing reports that they've offered contracts that could be fixed term or fixed price contracts. So you get £80,000 for 3 years, or you get £70,000 for 3 years with the option of bonuses, etc., up to £90,000. So that could be one way out of this impasse, but they're still in ongoing talks.
Yeah, and of course, very quickly, if the game doesn't go ahead, if they're on strike, the WRU could be losing, what, some £10 million, of course, if the game doesn't go ahead. Even though maybe many people reflect that the Welsh team is not in its fit state to beat England at the moment. Anyway, Port, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. More from Cardiff, of course, throughout the afternoon. More reaction to what we've been hearing at Westminster. We'll be back in a moment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 2 o'clock here with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this Wednesday afternoon, Shamima Begum loses her legal challenge over that decision to remove her British citizenship. Her barristers argued she was a victim of child trafficking. The security services continue to assess that she poses a risk to national security. Should the UK have been prepared to take her back or not? We'll be discussing that. The secret operation to bring President Biden to Kyiv by rail. The British Transport Secretary Mark Harper has now announced £10 million to help their rail network. We'll be talking to the Ukrainian rail boss who's been praised for organising the secret trip for the US president. And millions likely to face these empty supermarket shelves for weeks to come amid shortages of fruit and veg. Find out why our salad supplies are wilting. And I'm sure you've got a view on that. Let us know, gbviews at gbnews.uk. And, of course, we'll have all your comments coming up. But before that, latest news headlines with Aaron.
Noon to you. It's 2:01. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister is facing renewed pressure to strike a deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol. Rishi Sunak told the Commons intensive talks with the EU are ongoing, and he wants to make sure he ticks all the boxes. Mr Sunak also suggested any new deal would be put to a vote in the Commons.
I am a Conservative, a Brexiter and a Unionist, and any agreement that we reach needs to tick all three boxes. It needs to ensure sovereignty for Northern Ireland, it needs to safeguard Northern Ireland's place in our union, and it needs to find practical solutions to the problems faced by people and businesses. I will be resolute in fighting for what is best for Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom.
Sir Keir Starmer says Labour will support the Brexit trade arrangement, but he's criticised the delays, suggesting Tory division is partly to blame.
Everyone knows the basis of this deal has been agreed for weeks, but it's the same old story. The country has to wait while he plucks up the courage to take on the malcontents, the reckless, the wreckers on his own benches. But I'm here to tell him he doesn't need to worry about that, because we will put country before party and ensure that Labour votes to get it through.
Shamima Begum's lawyers say every possible avenue will be urgently pursued to challenge today's ruling, which upholds the decision to remove her British citizenship. The 23-year-old, who left the UK to join the terrorist group Islamic State in Syria, lost her appeal, with her case dismissed on all grounds. The Home Office has welcomed the ruling, but her lawyers say it leaves no protection for a British child trafficked out of the UK. Earlier, the Shadow Attorney General, Emily Thornberry, told us people should be allowed to return to the country to face justice.
Don't want, and it will be a threat to possibly our country, maybe other countries, is for there to be a large cohort of people who are simply stateless, who have no future, who have no hope, who are living in camps somewhere. What will happen to them? What will they think about, the West? What threat will they be in the long term to the West, or their children will be to the West in the long term? We do need, as an international community, to think this through and not wash our hands of people.
Some breaking news for you. Ambulance and health workers will strike on March the 8th, with Unison announcing talks with the government have failed. Meanwhile, the Royal College of Nursing's initially paused next week's 48-hour walkouts to negotiate with the Health Secretary. The government says a 3.5% pay rise is affordable, but the union wants 5% above inflation. An inquest has been opened into the death of Nicola Bully, whose body was found on Sunday. Preston Coroner's Court heard the mother of two was identified by her dental records. Her body was recovered from the River Wyre in Lancashire, a mile from where she was last seen on January the 27th. New CCTV footage has been released of a missing aristocrat and her partner as police renew their appeal to find them. Constance Martin, convicted sex offender Mark Gordon and their newborn baby were last seen on the 8th of January in New Haven in Sussex. Video shows the couple walking near a petrol station, wearing big coats and carrying large bags. Authorities believe they've been sleeping in a tent and are concerned about the baby's welfare. London Underground drivers will stage a fresh strike on Budget Day next month. Drivers will walk out on March the 15th in a dispute over pensions and working arrangements. It follows a vote in favour of industrial action by 99% of ASLEF members on a turnout of 77% in the ballot. It's GB News. More as it happens, but now it's back to Mark.
Aaron, thank you very much indeed. Now, let's reflect that PMQs, Prime Minister's Questions, was back after that recess. Yes, it was pretty spirited. Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer clashing over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Well, branding the post-Brexit trade agreement as poorly implemented, Sir Keir insisted the basis for any deal must be to remove those unnecessary checks on goods, adding that the Prime Minister was pulling the wool over his own MP's eyes. Rishi Sunak retorted that he would be resolute in fighting what was best for Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom, but also confirming that MPs will have a say on the deal in terms of a vote. Let's have a listen once more to the main exchanges.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is biting his tongue, but at some point the irreconcilables on his benches are going to twig and they're going to come after him. The former Trade Minister says there can be no role for the European Court of Justice in Northern Ireland. So will the Prime Minister be honest with them and tell them that's not going to happen?
For the honourable gentleman to be talking about a deal that he hasn't even seen, that we are still negotiating, that isn't finalised, and it's his usual position when it comes to the European Union. It's give the EU a blank cheque and agree to anything they offer. It's not a strategy, Mr. Speaker. That's surrender.
Now, the Prime Minister clearly wants a closer relationship with the EU. So can he confirm that if there's a deal, he will pull the protocol bill?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, look, what the honourable gentleman wants to put the EU first. I want to put Northern Ireland first. And on these questions, the honourable gentleman said he would respect the result of the referendum, and then he promised to back a second one. All the while, he was constantly voting to frustrate Brexit. And I know what the British people know, that on this question, he can't be trusted to stick up for Britain.
But it's the same old story. The country has to wait while he plucks up the courage to take on the malcontents, the reckless, the wreckers on his own benches. But I'm here to tell him he doesn't need to worry about that, because we will put country before party and ensure that Labour votes to get it through. He should accept our offer, ignore the howls of indignation from those on his side who will never take yes for an answer. Why doesn't he just get on with it?
But the honourable gentleman talks about his plans. We have heard that tomorrow he's going to announce 5 missions. But we already know what they are. It's uncontrolled immigration, it's reckless spending, it's higher debt, and it's softer sentences. And for the fifth pledge, Mr. Speaker, we all know it's that he reserves the right to change his mind on the other 4.
Well, let's get more with our political reporter, Olivia Utley, who's down in Westminster for us. And, Olivia, this is getting quite intriguing, isn't it? Because we've got Sir Geoffrey Donaldson speaking a little later from the DUP, saying, I don't know what the timing will be for any agreement. I'm clear we have a lot of support here in Parliament for the stance we're taking. But we've got then Sir Keir Starmer indicating everyone knows the deal has been done for weeks. Why doesn't he get on with it? I mean, those are two different assessments.
Yes, absolutely. And there have been reports for a while now that Rishi Sunak actually agreed the text of this new deal with EU leaders weeks ago. Now, Number 10 vehemently denies that because that report has caused big issues with the DUP and backbench Conservative MPs who feel that if the deal was agreed weeks ago, then they should have been kept in the loop. Now, it's not clear whether or not that deal was agreed a while ago or if, as Rishi Sunak says, it was only talked about in the last few days. But either way, Jeffrey Donaldson's adamant that he won't be bounced into agreeing to a deal before the anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement in a few weeks' time is pretty frustrating for Rishi Sunak, who was hoping that there'd be a way to sort of bludgeon, if you like, the DUP into accepting these new terms. It was interesting what Keir Starmer did today. His strategy was to expose some of those divisions in the Conservative Party over this new deal. He talked about the ECJ. Now, that's very interesting because the biggest stumbling block for the DUP and for Brexiteers in the Conservative Party is that the European Courts of Justice would still have jurisdiction over Northern Irish affairs in the New Deal. And of course, the EU says that they can't possibly contemplate not doing that. So bringing that issue to light was pretty awkward for Rishi Sunak. The question of whether there would be a vote on a new deal is also tricky for Rishi Sunak because he would ideally like to avoid that vote because it would expose just how many MPs in his own party disagree with him. That said, Rishi Sunak sort of held his own. He managed to sort of paint Keir Starmer as someone who's obsessing over what the EU thinks and what the EU wants, while Rishi Sunak, is concerned about what Northern Ireland thinks and what British people want. So as comebacks go, it was relatively effective. I'd call it a draw.
OK, and an indication, of course, perhaps that the real vote to come may be imminently. We shall see what that emerges. But Olivia, thank you for that. But let's speak now to Henry Hill, who's Deputy Editor of Conservative Home. Henry, what's your understanding of where we are? I mean, certainly Sir Keir Starmer was telling the NFU yesterday that he expected not to be in Birmingham, but to be in the chamber to vote on the deal. And he's gone doubling down on that today. Everyone knows the deal's been done for weeks.
Yeah, so people I've spoken to who are relatively close to the negotiations on the UK government side think that the broad outline of the deal was agreed weeks ago, and indeed most of the specifics. We were expecting Rishi Sunak to have unveiled it by now. When he says Sir Keir Starmer in PMQs that Starmer is commenting on a deal that he hasn't seen, well, the reason he hasn't seen it is because Rishi Sunak won't show it to anyone. It does look as if basically the government has come back. They maybe expected it to land better in Northern Ireland than it did, and now they're trying to find a way to make sure, if they can, that this will not only be acceptable to the European Union, but will be acceptable to the DUP, who are the crucial players in this game.
Right. And given that, Sir Jeffrey Donaldson telling everyone in the chamber, talking about the fundamental constitutional issues, talking about a complete rewriting of the treaty text. I mean, the EU's not going to sit happily with that.
No, this has been the problem from the beginning. The DUP's analysis of what the protocol does to Northern Ireland's constitutional position is basically right. And the entire way that these negotiations have been conducted has consistently undermined the claim in the Belfast Agreement that Northern Ireland's default position is as an integral part of the United Kingdom until that's changed by a referendum. And yes, the EU has refused to move from that initial position. But there are basically two levels on which this is being conducted, and I think they're being confused. One is the pure legal constitutional level. On that level, it's a question of Rishi Sunak passing a deal through the Westminster Parliament. He doesn't have to ask the DUP for that. Labour have said they'll vote for it. And I think a lot of the framing challenging Rishi Sunak to face down his backbenchers has that frame in mind. But the other reality is Stormont needs to come back, and only the DUP can do that.
Yeah, in terms of getting power sharing going. Well, we've talked about the EU, we've talked about the ECHR. There's another E, of course, which is the ERG, the European Research Group, the hardline Brexiteers, if you like. They were meeting last night. Do we know what they've decided or what they've told Rishi Sunak? Because clearly this is what we believe Keir Starmer was referring to as the irreconcilables.
We don't know. We can guess. Mark Francois MP, the current leader of the EIG, did a piece for Conservative Home recently in which he set out the position, which is that he wants Northern Ireland to be subject to the same framework that's in the withdrawal agreement, which is that disputes between the EU and Great Britain are referred to an independent arbitrator and not overseen by the ECJ. Now, I think that's quite a purist position that the EU would never accept, but that's probably the position that's been restated to Rishi Sunak.
And is the other interesting dynamic, and when we're talking about the pressure on the Prime Minister, that we're getting these indications that Washington wants something signed, sealed and delivered to mark this 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement?
Yes, absolutely. But that's where the DUP come back in, because Washington wants a deal so that Stormont is back up and running, so that in April, for the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Agreement, it's there so they can have a big celebration and Joe Biden can visit. The entire timeline of these has been about Stormont. But if the DUP aren't squared off, that's not going to happen. OK, Henry, thank you very much for those insights. But let's move on now to Belfast and to Stormont and speak to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. And Darren, as we were just hearing there, clearly this has got to work to get the DUP back on board, to get Stormont working once more.
Yeah, indeed, and there is incredible frustration about that among the people who do not support the DUP, Mark. We have to remember that while it is the main unionist party, it's no longer the largest party, that is Sinn Féin, and then it gets around 25, 27, 28, 30% of the vote. Less than a third of people here support the DUP, and yet many feel that they are the reason that government doesn't exist here in Northern Ireland. Stormont is not up and running. Some kind of key decisions that could be made about people's lives are not being made here in Belfast, or if they are, they're being made by civil servants. But we've got direct rule from London again, and there is incredible frustration about that. And while Henry's entirely right that the motivation for these talks, the reason they're happening now, the reason that Rishi Sunak spoke to Ursula von der Leyen on the phone last night and apparently will do so later on this week again, is to try and get devolution restored here by April to mark that 25th anniversary. It is clear that Joe Biden does want to visit Northern Ireland to mark that kind of pretty historic occasion. But at the same time, the DUP are making it clear that they will not be operating on that timetable. They want to get things right as they see it. But in the end, as I say, there are a whole range of things. Teachers going on strike, civil servants going on strike, decisions about the healthcare sector here, education and elsewhere, where people, when you talk to them here in Belfast, are incredibly frustrated that those decisions are not being made locally, and they do just want to get politicians back up on the hill here to make those decisions.
Yeah. Darren, for the moment, thank you very much indeed, and we'll see what emerges in the coming days, if anything, of course. But for the moment, thank you very much. But let's just update you with some breaking news that we're getting from the Independent Office for Police Conduct, which says it's launched an investigation into the welfare check that was carried out on Nicola Bully and her family. That was by Lancashire Police on January the 10th. Before, of course, she was last seen in St Michael's on wire. That's just been released by that independent office. Of course, her inquest was opened and adjourned today, but more reaction coming up on that shortly. Stay with us here on GB News Live.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Tonight, a special edition of Farage.
In her first TV interview as Home Secretary, Suella Braverman tells GB News she's proud to be British.
I think there is a tendency to apologise and be a bit shy about our greatness.
She vows to stem the tide of small boats crossing the channel.
We need to ensure that we fix this problem of illegal migration.
The Home Secretary says she won't sell out Northern Ireland and she's not afraid of controversy. Suella Braverman talks exclusively to me, Liam Halligan.
Tonight on Farage, GB News at 7 p.m.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Let's just remind you of that breaking news we were bringing you. The Independent Office for Police Conduct now launching an investigation into the welfare check that was carried out on Nicola Bully and her family. That was by Lancashire Police back on January the 10th, before she was last seen on January the 27th. This is according to the watchdog just coming through. Clearly, there are other questions in terms of the Lancashire Police operation, of course, in terms of why it took so long for the body to be discovered and then recovered. But we are just getting a bit more from the office saying, following a referral by Lancashire Constabulary on Thursday, we have now started the independent investigation regarding the contact the force had with Nicola Bully on January the 10th. And, of course, we had the inquest opening and being adjourned a little earlier. That is a separate process, of course, being told by the coroner that her body was identified by dental records and that the full inquest would take place in June once pathologists had been put in place to actually go through the various evidence, the medical evidence. So that's the latest we've got. And just to remind you, her family were not, for obvious reasons, at that coroner's court hearing for the inquest. But more as we get it. Now, let's reflect. Millions of shoppers are facing empty shelves, perhaps for weeks to come. At least 2 supermarket chains have started to ration their fruit and veg, salad in particular, because of shortages of fresh produce. Asda and Morrison's yesterday putting a cap on items including tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, lettuce, salad, broccoli, cauliflower and raspberries. Quite a long list. Well, during the winter months, of course, Britain imports the bulk of those crops from Spain and Morocco, but the harvest there have been hit by floods, even snow and hail, what they call a perfect storm. UK farmers now cutting back on production too because of the soaring price of gas and fertiliser needed to grow crops in terms of polytunnels and greenhouses. Well, let's reflect. We're going to speak to Jack Carson in a moment. He's at the National Farming Union Conference in Birmingham. But first, let's speak to Will Hollis, who's been talking to shoppers trying to cope with the empty shelves in Lincoln. Have they managed to find anything there in Lincoln?
Yes, well, I'm stood outside of Morrison's, which is one of the 2 supermarkets that's decided to ration certain fruit and veg. Here at Morrison's, they're rationing, in particular, cucumbers, tomatoes and peppers. So if you go into this supermarket and many other supermarkets around the country, you'll see little signs that says you can only buy 2 of this item. The other supermarket where you'll find that this is a problem is Asda, where there's actually more foods that you are rationed on, but you can actually buy more of them. So, for example, as you were saying, cauliflowers and raspberries at Asda, you can get 3 of them. And I've been standing out here in quite a busy area, lots of people coming from the local university, but also people coming into Lincoln City because this is their local supermarket, and asking them, how is that shortage of fruit and veg going to affect the way that you might eat in the coming weeks?
I do understand if there aren't tomatoes, I think it's fairer to ration them than let somebody buy them all. It's not probably going to affect me a great deal. I do feel for those who would need to buy more of them.
I mean, I'll probably just end up getting ready meals, to be honest, because it's not really sustainable financially for me.
Because there's going to be restrictions on how much you can buy, I'm going to have to buy frozen fruits and vegetables rather than fresh ones, which will impact the quality of my cooking.
I think it's quite insulting because it's almost the idea people can't be trusted to buy certain things, be responsible with it, and I think it should be completely up to us.
Now, we haven't heard anything from other supermarkets. We haven't heard anything from other supermarkets, including Tesco, as to whether they're going to make the decision to ration in. But British Retail Consortium has said that supermarkets are adept to managing supply chain issues and are working with farmers to ensure that customers are able to access a wide range of fresh produce. And of course, this all sits at the back of different problems with supply chains within the UK, including, for example, eggs. It's been a bit of a problem with eggs for a while, so I think some people are getting quite used to seeing some empty shelves there, Mark.
Yeah, although one reflects you're going to have to go some to eat 3 cauliflowers in one go. But anyway, let's move on from that. Thank you, Will, outside Morrison's, and bring in Jack, who's at the National Farming Union Conference in Birmingham, because this is something that some of the NFU say they've been warning about for quite a while, Jack.
That's exactly right. It was only yesterday that in her opening address, Minette Batters, who's the NFU president, warned that the clock was ticking for the government to provide to give the support to farmers so they could produce food more reliably and protect the country's food security. And today, when Therese Coffey, the Secretary of State for Environment, spoke, she brought back those ABCD plan that she had back when she was Health Secretary with her plan for patients. She's moved that back into DEFRA with a plan of ABCD: agriculture, biosecurity, conservation and delivery, with a big focus today on biosecurity. But we've seen, as she's speaking today, the fact that some supermarkets are having to ration some of the produce. Earlier on, I caught up with the NFU board chair for horticulture to find out actually why these farmers are facing these shortages, and this is what he had to say.
Well, there's two factors. There's some immediate factors with the weather and the climate, particularly the climate we had in the autumn, which brought some of the salad crops growing in southern Europe, Morocco, earlier. So basically the warmer conditions basically pushed the crops a bit harder than they expect to be at that time of year, and now they're suffering a bit now. So that affects the supply from southern Europe. But additional to that, we've got an impact that's due to energy prices, and that energy price factor has actually reduced the production of things like salads, tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers across northern Europe.
Well, Therese Coffey was actually challenged by farmers here when it came to the question and answer session after that, and in response to some of the food shortages, she said, well, we can't control the weather in Spain, but it's clear that farmers are asking for a lot more support with their energy costs in order to ensure that food security at home when supply chains overseas fall through like they are at the moment.
Yeah, and on that basis, Jack, I think they've been saying, look, you know, we need more help on heating costs, particularly if you want us to grow tomatoes or cucumbers in polytunnels or glass houses.
Well, that's exactly right. The cost of energy is up 79% for a lot of farmers, and so if they are to produce those warm weather fruit, that warm weather veg, and they have to heat those greenhouses, it's going to take more carbon emissions and more money to do that. And so if the government support is there, British farmers will try and do that, but if it's not, they're going to struggle.
OK, Jack at Birmingham and also Will in Lincoln, thanks very much indeed for updating us. And, of course, we'll see what the supermarkets have got to say. As we say at the moment, just those 2 supermarket chains limiting you to 3 cauliflowers. But that should be enough for your tea tonight. Anyway, more reaction to come. But let's actually now talk about the latest north of the border with the situation with the SNP. The Scottish Finance Secretary, Kate Forbes, Health Secretary Humza Yousaf and former Community Safety Minister Ash Regan, the runners so far to replace Nicola Sturgeon as the SNP leader. But, of course, it's Kate Forbes who's been under fire after saying she would not have voted for same-sex marriage. Ash Regan saying that she firmly supports the right to equal marriage. Let's get more now with Michael Blackley, political editor of the Scottish Daily Mail. And, Michael, we were speaking to Tony, our man there north of the border. Suggestions maybe there is going to be another candidate that may actually add their name as well to try and move things forward?
There was a bit of suggestion about that, but I don't think that is going to happen now. There was talk about a potential fourth candidate. We heard today Ben McPherson, a government minister, ruling himself out. I think some people were possibly pushing him forward. That's now not happening. So there could still be someone else. We wouldn't entirely rule it out, but I think it looks fairly unlikely. It looks like it's going to be a three-horse race for the contest.
Yeah. And therefore the difficulties continue, especially when John Swinney, of course, the Deputy First Minister, saying that it's been unhelpful that much of the contest has been focused on the issue of the Kate Forbes comments, i.e. they've not been able to discuss substantive issues such as health and poverty and drugs battles and so on.
Yes, it has been completely dominated this week by the comments that Kate Forbes made on her first day in the campaign. I don't think it's much of a surprise that we've not heard very much at all from the other two candidates in the last couple of days. They're probably perfectly happy for all the focus to be on Kate Forbes at the moment. But there is another leadership launch coming up on Friday when Ash Regan is launching her campaign. So we might hear a little bit more about policy then, because it's certainly been light in terms of policy so far. And indeed, all eyes have been on Kate Forbes over the last 24 hours. Last night, it looked a bit doubtful whether she was even going to stay in the race. She was having crisis talks with her campaign manager, but this morning she's had some time to think about it, and it looks like, from what we're being told, that she is continuing in the race. She is 100% committed to continuing for now anyway.
And have you been able to gauge what this has done, not just for the SNP, but in terms of politics in general north of the border? What are people saying to you out there on the streets?
Well, I think the issue has been so much focused on Kate Forbes that I think people are wondering just what is going to happen with the next First Minister. There's probably a bit of an impression that Humza Yousaf is now the front runner, but there's a lot of people that have real concerns about the performance in government of Humza Yousaf before. He's been faltering, to say the least, as the Health Secretary. The NHS has had a bit of a crisis in Scotland. Previously, he had a few gaffes when he was Justice Secretary and Transport Minister. He forced a pretty unpopular hate crime legislation through Parliament. So I think there's a lot of concern about Humza Yousaf, and people are probably looking and wanting to know if he's going to get a real challenge in this contest or not.
Michael, thank you very much indeed for updating us, and we'll see if, as you say, there is another candidate. I think by Friday they have to declare, but we'll update people from Glasgow and Edinburgh. But coming up, we'll update you from Ukraine on the rail boss there who masterminded President Biden's top-secret train trip to Kyiv and also manages to keep all the country's trains running on time. There's a novelty. Right on time now, news update with Aaron.
Thanks, Mark. It is 32 minutes past 2. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. Now, as we've been hearing, the breaking news in the last half an hour or so, the police regulator has launched an investigation into a welfare check on Nicola Bully just weeks before she went missing. The Independent Office for Police Conduct says it's looking at the contact Lancashire Police had with the mother of two on January the 10th. Her body was recovered from the River Wire on Sunday, more than 3 weeks after she disappeared. An inquest into her death has heard the 45-year-old was identified by her dental records. The Prime Minister has said he's a Conservative, a Brexiteer and a Unionist, and any agreement over the Northern Ireland Protocol will have to tick all three boxes. Rishi Sunak also suggested MPs will get to vote on any Brexit deal he strikes. Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer told the Commons Labour will support the agreement, but he criticised the delays, suggesting Tory division is partly to blame. Shamima Begum's lawyers say her case is nowhere near over and they will urgently challenge today's ruling, which upholds the decision to remove her British citizenship. The 23-year-old who left the UK to join the terrorist group Islamic State in Syria lost her appeal, with her case dismissed on all grounds. The Home Office has welcomed the ruling, but her lawyers say it leaves no protection for a British child trafficked out of the UK. And new CCTV footage has been released of a missing aristocrat and her partner as police renew their appeal to find them. Constance Martin, convicted sex offender Mark Gordon and their newborn baby were last seen on the 8th of January in New Haven in Sussex. Authorities believe they've been sleeping in a tent and they're concerned about the baby's welfare. TV online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Transport Secretary Mark Harper has announced £10 million to help Ukraine's rail network, which has, of course, been under huge strain since the war was launched a year ago. It's hoped that funding will help Ukraine's military operations as well as evacuating civilians. The railway praised for its service and punctuality despite Russia's invasion. Hitting the headlines here this week, of course, Alexander Kamyshin apologising for the fact that only 9 out of 10 trains were on time on Monday. Just to remind you, by contrast, the latest figures for the UK, 7 in 10 trains on time. He's also been praised for the operation to bring President Biden to Kyiv this week, the 20-hour round trip veiled in secrecy, saying on Twitter that the operation complicated but an honour and privilege, praising his staff, whom he called Iron People, and also apologising for the slight delay to other services as a result. I'm very glad to say Alexander joins us now, which is wonderful to speak to you, Alexander. And I gather it was called Rail Force One, is that right?
Yeah, that's how we finally call it. Rail Force One was born when Biden came to Kyiv.
And it looked very smart. I mean, I think the conference table inside and all the facilities, I assume that obviously you had to make huge security provisions to get this, to get through into Kyiv.
Well, security of our guests is our priority. We already got about 300 official delegations coming under Iron Diplomacy program, and bringing them in and out safely is our key priority. This case was, as I said, complicated, but we finally done it.
Yeah, and clearly underlining the importance that the rail network and the infrastructure has for the country. And we've got this news that there's £10 million in help on its way from the UK. And I think this is to help with things such as temporary bridges and lining tunnels and so on to be able to keep the trains running.
I'm grateful to Rail Network for what they do for us. They were probably one of the first railways from European Union standing with us and ready to help. We already got the first delegation from Rail Network coming to Ukraine, and happy to feel their real support from Railways family, from the European Union and from the UK.
And give us an indication of what sort of state the network is in, given all the aerial bombardments you've been suffering.
Well, we got about 12,000 damages of railway infra. You can imagine that's complicated. That makes our work harder. But finally, we always find a way how to fix and get back to operations, get back to keep running.
And this extraordinary statistic, 9 out of 10 trains still running on time, just to remind our commuters here, compared to 7 out of 10 here in Britain. How on earth do you do it?
Well, 2 days ago, when President Biden came to Kyiv, it was a painful day for me, because we had to delay several trains, like a dozen trains, and finally we had to do it to make Rail Force One arrive safely, arrive on time. I apologized because we had to make this on-time performance better, even those days. And usually we got slightly higher than 90%. Some days we got even 98% of our trains arriving on time. But it happened that to bring him safely and on time, we had to be quite strict with the security protocols. So we had to delay our trains. I apologize for that.
Well, there may be 1 or 2 rail franchises up for grabs here in Britain soon, including TransPennine. Maybe you in Ukraine there might have a thought about coming to join us over here in Britain and showing us how to do it. But Alexander, thank you for your time and, of course, your sterling efforts looking after President Biden. Thanks for your time here in GB News. What a story. Now, let's refer to what we've been hearing in court today with criminals in an organised gang at the centre of a major people smuggling ring, jailed for attempting to take Vietnamese nationals into the UK in the backs of lorries. Yes, not boats this time. The National Crime Agency able to disrupt the gang, part of a wider, much highly organised smuggling network. Now, despite the focus on the small boats, of course, the authorities saying the use of these lorries and other vehicles to smuggle immigrants remaining a significant problem. Our Home and Security Editor Mark White has more.
These officers from the National Crime Agency are about to take down a major people smuggling ring. An organised crime group operating from this address in Birmingham, responsible for smuggling illegal immigrants into the UK in the backs of lorries. In handcuffs, a leading figure in the conspiracy. Vietnamese national Hai Duong Le orchestrated the transportation of hundreds of his fellow countrymen and women on at least 7 separate occasions. Le and fellow gang member Habib Basodi are now convicted for their part in a wider people smuggling network, bribing lorry drivers to take illegal immigrants across the English Channel. The National Crime Agency put the gang under surveillance before moving in to disrupt their operation. These Vietnamese were found in the back of one of the lorries authorities intercepted. Those being smuggled were transported through the Channel Tunnel or on cross-channel ferries before being met by other members of the crime gang in the UK.
These 2 individuals, for us as an agency, we would view this as an excellent result because investigating organised immigration crime is not easy to do for a whole host of reasons. But I think that the fact that these 2 individuals have been found guilty is significant, not only for ourselves as an agency, but the law enforcement community.
Although the focus of late has been on the smuggling of people across the Channel in small boats, the use of lorries and other vehicles remains a key challenge for law enforcement and border officials. Thousands still attempt to sneak onto lorries here at Calais and at other French ports every year. The vast majority of drivers certainly don't want them on board and face heavy fines if any are found. But there are clearly some prepared to work with the criminal gangs in what can sometimes prove to be a deadly endeavour. In 2019, the bodies of 39 Vietnamese nationals were found inside this refrigerated lorry in Grays in Essex, having suffocated in the back of the airtight trailer. But that did little to deter the people smugglers from a criminal enterprise which, like the small boats trade, is worth many millions of pounds. For now, at least, one of those gangs has been disrupted, its key player in prison. Mark White, GB News.
More with Mark joining us in the studio, and clearly the Border Force may be reassessing operations now as regards lorries. Remember, of course, what was happening in Calais coming across, and maybe they've taken their eye off the ball?
Well, I think they would dispute that they've taken their eye off the ball. It was a major issue, the smuggling of people in the backs of lorries and other vehicles a few years back before the small boats crisis became such a big phenomenon.
Yeah.
And during that process, many millions of additional funding were given to the likes of the port of Calais to improve security there. They had these carbon dioxide measuring instruments. And
see if people were exhaling
absolutely
on board. Yeah.
Dogs were used, X-ray scanners were used, and they had certainly some successes. Not all the lorries that go through the ports are checked, though, so it is a bit of a lottery. And clearly, if you're an illegal immigrant, you get on board a lorry and it's not checked, then the chances are you get through to the UK. And the difficulty with this is that every year they pull thousands off the lorries, but they don't know exactly who's made it through to the other side.
And of course, still lucrative for the people smuggling gangs. One more thought while you're with us. We've got this news coming through from the police watchdog, the Independent Office for Police Conduct. It's going to look at this visit that Lancashire police made to Nicola Bully's home, January the 10th. It was about 17 days before she disappeared.
Yes, that's right. There was welfare checks and reports of an incident at the home that the police attended. Now, this was referred to the Independent Office for Police Conduct by Lancashire Police themselves.
Right, okay.
And they've reviewed that now at the IOPC, and they've decided that they will launch a full investigation. In a statement, they said, "We were notified by the force that an officer attended the family home on that date, the 10th of January, as part of a welfare check. Our thoughts," the IOPC say, "are with Miss Bully's family and with friends at this time." And of course, we know, Mark, that today an inquest opened and adjourned into Nicola Bully's death, the coroner revealing that she was identified through dental records, but not much else really at this very early stage, given about that process. But yeah, an absolute tragedy.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's return now to the news that broke earlier about Shamima Begum, who's lost the appeal against being stripped of her British citizenship. Let's get more reaction with Steve Valdez-Simons, who's a Refugee and Asylum Rights Director with Amnesty International. Steve, thanks for joining us once more. Do you think that's the end of the process?
Well, it certainly doesn't look like it. My understanding is the lawyers have made very clear that they intend to seek permission to appeal on presumably error of law grounds against this decision. So there may well be much more to come. And the real issue about whether the propriety of stripping British nationals of their citizenship and essentially banishing them to other parts of the world, that as an issue is certainly not going away, and certainly not going away for Amnesty.
Yeah, although we reflect that the British government's position was that she did have the availability, as they put it, of Bangladeshi citizenship, so she wasn't being made stateless as such.
Yes, that was the British government's position, but of course we all know that she was born in this country, born a British citizen, grew up here, lived all her life here until being lured to Syria as a schoolgirl. She's not been to Bangladesh, has no particular personal connection to that country. She doesn't know it. They don't know her. So why on earth she should be their responsibility rather than ours, the country of her actual citizenship at the time she was deprived? There's just no sensible reason.
Yeah, OK, well, we'll see what the lawyers... I think the indications are, as you say, that they will continue with the appeal process. But, Steve, thanks for joining us, bringing us your reaction. But let's just move on quickly now to what's going on in Cardiff as we speak, because, of course, just to remind you, Wales against England, the big match for the Six Nations on Saturday, but might not happen, as well as not being able to sing Delilah. Welsh players could go on strike, WRU meeting the players to try and thrash out a new deal on pay and conditions. Well, joining us now is Alex Bywater, rugby reporter of the Daily Mail, who indeed has been bringing us all the latest on this story on the back pages of the Mail. And Alex, writing today, you said that this was the very future Wales's national game resting on what will happen in discussions between the WRU and Warren Gatland's players. Which way is it going?
Well, I'm here at the Wales Hotel in the Vale of Glamorgan. The players are filing in now for their meeting with Welsh rugby bosses. At the moment, it's impossible to say really how it's going to go. But the reality is we're going to have to know by the end of today whether there is a strike or not. And that's what the discussions are going to happen now in the meeting that's taking place in the same hotel as me here in probably about 15, 20 minutes' time.
And no team announced, of course, by Warren Gatland. We don't think they've even been able to train for this huge match, given the difficulties of their performance on the pitch that we've seen. The WRU does appear to be in a real mess, not just in terms of paying the players, but also the way that the game is structured in Wales as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's so many issues for the Welsh Rugby Union to deal with right now. There's governance things that they're trying to push through. There's the sexism and misogyny accusations that hit last month. But this really is the most important one at the moment, because if a strike action is not averted and the England match on Saturday is off, then it's going to cost Welsh Rugby in the region of £9 to £10 million, which is going to be potentially ruinous for everyone involved. So, everything's on the line here at the moment.
And, of course, one reflects what Warren Gatland's thinking of this, having come back in to take on the team once more. I mean, will he have any play in the process of what's going on?
Not really in terms of the meeting that's going to happen now. That's going to be between Welsh Rugby Union's Professional Rugby Board, which is made up of representatives from the WRU, 4 regions, which is Dragons, Cardiff, Ospreys and Scarlets, and a couple of independent voters. And it's between them, the PRB, and every single professional player in Wales. So that's not just members of the Six Nations squad. That's everyone from the regions. So it's a pretty busy hotel lobby behind me.
OK, we'll let you get back to putting your ear to the door or getting the notes under the door. Alex, thank you very much for updating us. We'll see what emerges. Thank you very much. Now, a serial killer-obsessed woman who stabbed her on-off boyfriend to death has been jailed for life with at least 23 years in prison. Shay Groves sentenced at Winchester Crown Court for the murder of 25-year-old Frankie Fitzgerald. She stabbed 17 times last July in Hampshire. Let's get more with our reporter Ray Addison, who's been following events at Winchester Crown Court. Ray, it's pretty heavy-duty stuff.
Yeah, it's a very disturbing case, this one, Mark. Shay Groves was 26 at the time of this offence. Now, she was a goth, obsessed with serial killers, somebody who decorated her bedroom with framed portraits of murderers, people like Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe and Moors murderer Myra Hindley as well. Now, she'd been dating Frankie Fitzgerald, who was 25, on and off for around 6 months, and prosecutors during the trial said that she was completely obsessed with him. They had a mutual interest in role play involving domination and submission. Now, during the trial, the prosecution argued that Groves had used her interest in murder and true crime to try to prepare an alibi. She had a CCTV camera set up in her bedroom, and she would take clips from that footage and send it to a friend, Vicky Baitup, to imply imply that there had been sexual violence involved in her relationship. Now, in the early hours of the 17th of July 2022, as Frankie Fitzgerald was asleep in her bed, she used a dagger to slit his throat, and then she stabbed him 17 times in the chest as well. She didn't then call 999. Instead, she video phoned her friend Ms. Baitup and told her that she'd been looking through Mr. Fitzgerald's phone, had seen a message to a girl on Facebook and had, quote, lost it, and then stabbed him. She told Miss Baitup that she was going to clean up and bury him in the back garden. Now, at that point, Miss Baitup alerted the police. They arrived 5 hours later, and she told them that he had tried to attack her. Now, the court, obviously, the jury did not find that a convincing argument. In his summation, the judge said that this was clearly a crime of passion. She realised that her relationship with Frankie Fitzgerald was ending, and she had lost her temper and acted on impulse. She will now serve a minimum of 23 years in jail. She'll be 50 when she's eligible for parole.
Ray, thanks very much indeed for bringing us a disturbing case there at Winchester Crown Court. Thank you very much indeed. Now, Wizz Air failing to take off with its passengers, it seems, being named the worst short-haul airline by the British travelling public. They gave the Hungarian-based carrier 1 star out of 5 for the boarding experience, cabin environment and seat comfort, according to the consumer group Which. Wizz Air operating short-haul flights from 8 UK airports, including Birmingham, Edinburgh, Gatwick and Luton. Let's speak now to the Independent's travel correspondent and self-confessed frequent flyer, Simon Calder. We have to ask, were any of those frequent flights with Wizz?
Oh, of course, yes. I'm actually speaking to you, Mark, from here in France. I flew here actually on Volotea, a very good Spanish airline. But I've flown frequently on Wizz Air, and I can explain, I think, why people are really cheesed off with them. It's nothing to do with the fact that this isn't a profoundly safe and good value airline, in my experience. I just actually happened to book a flight with them yesterday to Israel. £130 it cost for a round trip. When I first went to Israel about 30 years ago, I paid twice as much as that. However, they are very, very poor. I am hearing from a lot of travellers dealing with disruption. And during the summer, we saw many, many cases of flights being cancelled at the last minute and passengers simply abandoned. This has also happened on other airlines, including EasyJet. However, what it seems to underpin is that we know what the rules are when your flight is cancelled. They're absolutely explicit. The airline has to look after you and find you an alternative flight, might well also have to pay you compensation. The trouble is that the enforcement of the rules is very, very poor. So effectively, Wizz Air, like other airlines, just thinks, oh, well, we can probably get away with it. Let's just string them along or refuse to answer and not do what we should be doing.
Yeah, and it's that experience then of trying to get them, contacting them, trying to get some recompense and so on. But just in terms of balance, we should reflect British Airways didn't do particularly well either.
Oh, no, but look, this is a survey of Which members, and they have their own particular views on things. I mean, Ryanair doesn't do well. The one airline which is a recommended provider is Jet2, just celebrated its 20th anniversary. They seem to do things pretty well. But look, we are fantastically lucky as a nation. We still have by far the best aviation market, certainly in Europe, arguably in the world. We've got great, safe airlines. I just wish that they would all treat customers better when things go wrong.
Simon, thank you very much indeed for that, and we hope to see you soon if, of course, you're allowed back on that Wizz flight and you get back in time. But good luck, and as you say, obviously you get what you pay for. But Simon updating us there from his sojourn in France. Coming up here on GB News, Patrick will be with you for the rest of the afternoon. We're back with you tomorrow at 12 with GB News Live, but we'll update you, of course, with all the latest coming up here. Stay with us. Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for